যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. Today we have back with us for the second time Professor Salvatore Babones. Thank you very much, sir, for coming on the podcast. It's an honor, and happy Tulsi Puja Divas to you, as well as Merry Christmas to you, sir. Ho ho ho.
It's great to be here, and with the #1 live streamer in India, how could I beat it?
No, it's an honor to have you, sir. But firstly, sir, what a book. What an incredible book. I just finished reading it like 5 minutes back. And no matter how much hate I get for saying this, but I see this on par with the kind of good PR that Swami Vivekananda did for Hindu spirituality, you have done for the Indian political system and democracy. If anyone's a leftist who hates their country, if it's an Indian leftist, they will become a patriot and nationalist by reading this book. And if they were a patriot and nationalist to begin with, they will become more so and will love India in many new different ways. So firstly, sir, how much research
I can't let you get away with that.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to put myself on a par with Swami Vivekananda. that's
Well,
like, should go without saying. Look, I'm thrilled that you love the book. I hope other people will pick up the book and enjoy it. It's just an academic work. It is not a inspirational work for the ages. This is I'm no Swami Vivekananda, though I do really appreciate Swami Vivekananda, and I have my Vivekananda and with Ramakrishna and the mother over in the other room. If we were podcasting there, I'd pick it up and show it to you. But I'm a great admirer, but certainly not on a par. But thank you.
So, sir, how much research, how many years of research, and how many books and essays and speeches did you read and invest in for coming up with this book?
Look, it's a 5-year project, but not a continuous 5-year project. I wrote other things. I even wrote one short book on Australian universities while researching this book, because you really can't research and write at the same time. So the Australian Universities book was done along the way. But 5 years of serious reading and research. And a lot of that's just driven by the fact that I found you can't take anything about India for granted. Anything anyone tells you, you can't just look up. If you want to know when something happened in Indian history or what happened or who did what, you can't just pick up a history book, consult it, and accept the answer. And that was very frustrating, because I'm not an historian. I'm a sociologist. I'm used to working with history as raw material that, I can just look up what the historians have said about something. I don't have to question it. Doesn't matter which history book I look at, they're all going to say the same thing. And with India, that simply wasn't true. What I found, it was really, it was really unavoidable to triangulate, to read multiple histories from multiple perspectives, to sometimes go and do the historical work myself. So if I felt I couldn't trust the historians, I'd go to the newspaper archives, and unfortunately I only have the Times of India archive, so I don't have every newspaper, but Times of India is a good newspaper of record for the colonial period, especially. And then, I also have the Western newspapers. So sometimes I actually had to go back to the original sources because you just can't trust anything anyone says about India, whether that's a British colonialist or an independence writer or a post-independence writer. I mean, a communist writer, a Nehruvian writer, or let's be honest, an RSS historian. You can't take any of them for granted. So it was a very time-consuming project.
Yes. And so then to begin with the topics of the book, firstly, what the hell is an electoral autocracy? Because if people are voting for it and people are voting into power, an autocrat, does that implicitly mean that people are voting for the suspension of rule of law and are wanting the head of state to do anything they want? What is electoral autocracy?
In theory, there could be an elected autocracy. The problem is every actual electoral autocracy that has ever existed only lasted for one election. That is Napoleon III, the Emperor of France, Napoleon the Great's nephew. He held a plebiscite. Do you want Napoleon III as your new president? And he won the plebiscite, and then that was it. No more elections, right? So there is such a thing as an electoral autocracy, but they don't last very long. Now, the Rise of Democracy Institute has called India an electoral autocracy merely by putting a number on an index. That is, they created their democracy index. They said if you score below 0.5, you're no longer a democracy. You're an electoral. And you have elections, you're an electoral autocracy. And they did that simply because they needed something alarming to put in their report. The business of democracy rankings is that you need people to fund you. These don't just happen. They're funded by governments and especially by private foundations. And you have to convince the private foundation, there's an emergency, democracy is in threat, it's under danger. And the best way to find that democracy is in danger in the world, which by the way, it isn't, the best way to find it is if you weight by population and you move India from the democracy category to the non-democracy category, well, then suddenly democracy falls by half because more than half of the people in the world who live in democratic countries live in India. I mean, that may sound strange to say, but if you add up the numbers, I mean, that's where it stands. So if you include India as a democracy is doing pretty well if you weight by population. So they did these two things at the same time. They shifted from a count to a weighted by population, and they made an arbitrary cutoff on their index. There's no, their index is not an index that is finely calibrated such that greater than 0.5 is democratic and less than 0.5 is non-democratic. Their index score is just the outcome of dozens of indicators that are put together into an index score. And they found that India was very close to that threshold. And so by defining 0.5, which in retrospect to naive viewers or naive readers, that sounds right. Oh, less than half democracy, that's no longer a democracy, that's an autocracy. But of course, to a methodologist who knows that the distributional qualities of the VDEM scores have no theoretical basis behind them, they could as well have picked 0.4872 as the cutoff between democracies and autocracies. That is, there's no reason why that number 0.5 is somehow magical. It's not like E or pi, right? It's not a mathematical constant. It's just a number they picked out of the hat. But it's a number that sounds credible to non-experts. And I think that was the key. So that non-experts accepted, less than 0.5, it's no longer a true democracy. It's now an electoral autocracy. And there you go.
Also point out in the book that among the 5 metrics that they choose, 3 of them which are actually direct and objective don't even are not even relevant for the rankings that India gets. The 2 metrics that actually make are relevant are subjective and indirect.
Yeah, they're not relevant for the rankings as such. They're relevant for the score in that they go into the calculation of the score. They're not relevant for the rankings because all countries get the same score. So if you think of VDEM, there are 5 indicators in VDEM. Well, I haven't rehearsed this in a while, but one of them is does the country have elected officials? By the purely according to the Constitution, is leadership elected? Well, virtually every constitution in the world says that leaders are elected. I mean, even communist dictatorships have a constitution that say the leaders are elected. And then the second one is, well, is there universal suffrage? Well, that was mainly put in there because then they could say that countries that had women who weren't allowed to vote 100 years ago were not somehow real democracies. But virtually every country in the world has universal suffrage, or very close. I mean, Thailand loses a few points because Buddhist monks are not allowed to vote in Thailand.
Yeah.
So it was a couple points, but it's simply the percentage of the electorate or percentage of adults who are allowed to vote, which everywhere, even in communist dictatorships, is nominally 100%. And even if you go back to the era where that was not true, the indicator isn't really relevant. I mean, was the U.S. a democracy before 1925? I think it was that women were given the vote. Well, clearly the U.S. was a democracy. It was a democracy where women weren't allowed to vote. It wasn't an electoral autocracy, which is how it would be characterized now, because that not allowing half the population to vote would drop the U.S. down below the threshold. It was a democracy. It was just democracy where women weren't allowed to vote. Right. So they take the first two have no discriminant power because virtually every country gets 100%. The third one is the quality of elections. But again, you would think the quality of elections was measuring how competitive they are. But nowhere in the 6 indicators for the quality of elections is the competitiveness of the election measured. Instead, it's a series of pro forma criteria. For example, is the electoral management body independent? Is there violence at the polls? So again, most countries aren't discriminate. I'm sorry. This index does not have discriminatory power to differentiate between democracies and non-democracies. In fact, on the quality of its elections, on most of those indicators, Vietnam, which is a communist dictatorship, scores better than India. Why? Well, there's no violence to the polls. Hong Kong scores very well. Why? There's no violence to the polls. The electoral roll is complete. If you compare Hong Kong to India, perfect electoral roll, beautifully conducted elections, no violence. The only problem is it's not, you're not given any choice who to vote for. So all of the discriminant power of the VDEM, the Variety of Democracy Institute rankings, comes down to the final 2 highly subjective indicators or sub-indices, which are freedom of association and freedom of expression. And if you believe that freedom of expression is in dire shape in India and that you're not allowed to associate with whom you want politically, well, then India is not a democracy. But it seems to me that it's extremely easy to form political parties in India, that everyone and his brother has their own political party, and that, having watched and read the Indian press for 5 years now, having subscriptions to some 4 Indian daily newspapers and websites and watching Indian YouTube, there's a lot of speaking going on in India. I mean, not just a lot of pro-Modi speaking. There's a lot of speaking your opinion going on in India. Now, I have to admit, I only have access to the English language media. For all I know, the national language media are entirely still tilted, and you're unable to criticize the BJP in the national language media. I find that hard to believe, but I don't have direct evidence of that. For that, I have to rely on indirect evidence. But you put it all together, and the evaluation that India is not a democracy really comes down to a small number of questions where experts feel, and the experts are Indian experts, feel that they can't express themselves and they can't associate with whom they want. Now, in the book, I try where possible to get quantitative objective indicators for these, but mostly this is a matter of subjectivity. I mean, can the Indian Express report what it believes? I don't know. You don't know. The Indian political scientist expert doesn't know. The only person who knows is the editor of the Indian Express. Now, I strongly suspect, sorry to go on at such length, this is something I do in the book. I'm almost certain, I won't even say almost, I am certain that the Indian Express and the Times of India and Hindustan Times, that they can report more freely today than they could in 1976. I have no doubt about that. Yet when the VDEM evaluators tell us that freedom of the press is in as dire shape today as it was in the depths of the emergency, then I have to question their objectivity. Because I don't know what the proper score is for India today, but I know it's better than it was in the emergency, and I know it's better than Hong Kong today. Right? And if I put those two together, then I know the score that I'm getting today is biased.
So then one of the things you are basically saying or claiming here, I think people would shudder to say it or even contemplate on this, is that even if everyone in the country does not get to vote, it's still a democracy. People would say, at least like English literature graduates would say, that makes it not a democracy.
Of course it's democracy. Our paradigmatic case of a democracy is ancient Athens. In ancient Athens, only male citizens could vote. Male adult property owning citizens could vote. Well, that was a minority of the population was allowed to vote. Yet that developed our norms of what a democracy is. I mean, Aristotle's Politics uses Athens as the paradigmatic case for defining what is democracy. Similarly, clearly, the United States was democracy in the 19th century, a very robust democracy, a democracy that enslaved Africans, a democracy that denied rights to Chinese immigrants, denied rights to Native Americans, a democracy that gave no voting rights to women. But its procedures were clearly democratic in the sense that, what kind of government was it? It wasn't an autocracy. There wasn't a single dictator in America for the first 150 years. It wasn't a authoritarian regime. That is, it had a robust party system where people were fighting. It wasn't a totalitarian. It wasn't a monarchy. I mean, what was it? It was a democracy. Now, it may have been a flawed democracy in that only white men were allowed to vote, but it was a democracy of white men. It wasn't a non-democracy.
And why do these organizations need to make alarmist claims to get funding? Why can't Truth get funding?
Well, Truth can get funding if the truth is alarming. Funding requires convincing somebody where there are hundreds of others trying to convince them that your project is worth funding. I mean, if you go to a foundation and you say, I want to create a ranking for, I want to create a men's rights ranking around the world. And they're like, what, are you some kind of, sexist manosphere, Andrew Tate follower? I mean, no one's going to fund you because no one considers a man's rights index to be that important. It's not a problem, right? So you have to say that democracy is a problem. It's under threat. We have to know where the threats are. We have to be able to measure it and quantify it so we can identify the threats and work on improving them. If your narrative is democracy is great, everything's going fantastically, there are no problems, why should that foundation, which has lots of calls for competing funding, or for that matter, the organization that started funding the Rise of Democracy Institute, the European Union, why should the European Union say, we're going to fund this big democracy effort instead of funding a poverty research center for studying poverty in the European Union, or a hunger research center to study hunger in Africa? You have to convince them that there is a public policy need for this. I mean, why are so many Indians talking about, I mean, I've heard from at least a dozen Indians who are starting their own Indian democracy indices. Why are they doing it? Not because they think it's important to measure democracy, but because they think it's unfair that India gets a bad democracy ranking and they want to do their own democracy ranking. So you need to have a sense of emergency to get the money.
Sir, you have made mind-boggling, scathing criticisms of VDEM here. The insane kinds of flaws that you have pointed out. My first reaction was, are you getting sued or something? Or if not, what has been the reaction like from that side to this book?
No, nothing. No, you get ignored as an academic, as an outsider. I'm not an outsider. I have a professorship at a major university. As an academic who challenges received notions, mainly you just get ignored. It's very difficult to publish your work. So I did have trouble with peer review. And if you look carefully, you'll see this book is published by a small Australian commercial publisher, not by a major academic press. And the reason is that the peer reviews for the book were scathing. If you know, they didn't say I was wrong. They simply said, if you publish this book, no other South Asian studies scholar will ever publish with you again. You know, this book is an apologist for fascism. Those were two of the comments I got from peer reviewers. Right. What they do is ignore you and try to prevent you getting published. I had one group even who tried to get me fired at the University of Sydney. They wrote to my dean asking that I be fired for endangering the lives of South Asian studies scholars. But you know, we have robust academic freedom protections. I'm not in any danger. I have no trouble. You know, my career goes on. I get paid every 2 weeks. You know, there's no issue from my side, except that it is, it's always difficult to convince people to pay attention. And that's not just about me. I mean, if you were doing work during COVID where you questioned the usefulness of face masks, or for that matter, an example I use repeatedly with students, the scientific establishment, the medical establishment, was convinced that stress caused ulcers. And these two Australian medical scientists who later won the Nobel Prize for it, spent 20 years trying to get funding for their studies showing that, no, it's just a bacteria. You can just take antibiotics and cure ulcers. But, you know, to get that kind of paradigm shift requires upending entire careers. You know, people who have invested everything in a single point of view. And it's difficult to do that. And, you know, if I've tried to do one thing with my research over the last 25 years, it's been to always try to upend existing point of views, to do what we call paradigm shifting research instead of just normal science that adds a little bit and a little bit and a little bit to our knowledge. And I fully accept that if you want to do paradigm shifting research, you're not going to make any friends from people who are bought into the existing paradigm. It's just a fact.
Right. Sir, I see a pattern here that anything that ends up or comes across as seemingly pro-India is going to get first ignored with the hope that nobody checks it out. They don't want to give it any publicity. And when it in fact does become popular, they are going to come discussing it, because that is what has happened with the new movie Dhurandhar. This is what happened with J. Sai Deepak's book, India That Is Bharat as well. First, they ignored it. They pretended like that book never came out. 2 years later, 3 years later, everyone started reviewing it. So I think in the next 5 years, this is going to be the most reviewed book discussing India.
Well,
that's when the criticisms are really going to come in.
Yeah, in India and outside India are two different things. So Dhurandhar, of course, as a film, I haven't seen it yet. I'm hoping to go this weekend. But it's a film, and let's face it, it's a highly sensationalist film, at least from what I've seen from the preview. You know, I'm not even sure I want to see the movie, having seen the preview. It looks a little too bloody for me. Look, J. Sai Deepak's work, it has been very, very popular, but he actually is an outsider academic. You know, I'm not. I mean, I have an associate professorship at a global top 100 university and an H index of 28. And, you know, I mean, I do real academic work. Deepak is a brilliant non-academic whose work is odd. I mean, it doesn't fit into academic paradigms, and it's clearly work that is argued as a legal brief. That is, he takes the barrister's point of view that I'm going to prove my case, as opposed to a truly academic point of view of standing back and saying, what is the truth here? And in that sense, I think J. Sai Deepak, okay, I let him off because he's not an academic. It's not his job to be even-handed. Some people watching may know that I just released a video about a New York Times article written by an academic at University of Western Australia attacking the RSS. And his research is activist research. And I draw a line difference between a J. Sai Deepak, who's not academic and not behaving like an academic. Okay, fair enough. What I really dislike are the academics who use their research to prove something. That is, this researcher is fighting, he writing on all his profiles, he's fighting far right political movements. And it's like, well, that's not the job of an academic. That's the job of an activist. And it's very nice to have an academic appointment with $100,000 a year salary to support your activism. But that's not what academia is for. I mean, when I started writing this book, I didn't have any opinion about who are the good guys or the bad guys, who's telling the truth, who's lying. What I found in writing the book was, okay, there are contradictions here. Which one of these is telling me the truth? Well, I have to go down to another level to find out, where the truth is. And, I didn't know when I started writing the book what the truth about India was. And I was genuinely curious to find out, which should be what every academic does. Unfortunately, that's often not the case, especially in the social sciences.
I was about to ask this very question that, so two questions here. Firstly, do you think dispassionate scholarship is even possible? Isn't it a human tendency to take sides? And if not, do you think we are past that? Will it ever come back again? Because the damage has been done so much that even the counters to it are not really dispassionate scholarships. Not most people are like you. Everyone on the opposite side are also doing very passionate activism scholarship. Will we ever have a dispassionate scholarship in the majority?
Look, I'd like to think I do dispassionate scholarship. And the one piece of evidence I have for that is simply that I have no specialty in the areas I'm studying. I'm always going into the area fresh with no preconceived notions. If you go back and look at my writing pre-2020, I never said anything about India. I mean, I did a few articles about India's GDP statistics, but I had no point of view going in. I wasn't trying to prove this or prove that. I was trying to find out.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, in the social sciences, many people today go into the social sciences precisely because they want to prove something. And that trend has been exacerbated by the fact that it's now so competitive to get a job in the social sciences. I mean, most social science departments are scaling down, not scaling up, especially in the developed world. There's very little hiring in the social sciences, which means that you have to be very committed to the social sciences to do it. And if I can just contrast the psychological motives of people, if you're an activist who wants to spend your life as an activist, but there's no pay for activists, how do you get a job that will allow you to do your activism? Some people ask me, why is there so much anti-Semitism in academia and so many people who do nothing in academia but hate Israel and, by extension, hate Jewish people? And the answer is that it's hard to get a job where you're paid to hate Jewish people. This job category doesn't exist. But if you can get an academic appointment, that gives you tons of freedom to write about your passion projects. On the other hand, what if you're well-trained? And if you look at my background, I have a master's in applied mathematics from Johns Hopkins. I've worked at American Express doing credit card risk management. I still don't make as much money as I made before I came to academia. I didn't come to academia because I had something I desperately wanted to say, and the only way I could support myself was academia. I came to academia because I wanted a life of contemplation, science, of trying to solve problems in the world. I came because I wanted to be an intellectual, not because I wanted to a way to support my activism. And people like me used to be pretty common in the social sciences. If you read social science from 30, 40, 50 years ago, it's full of people doing science. Now, there are occasionally activists, and the activists came in with the 1970s, and that's where the activism really started to creep in. But still, activists in the social sciences, even when I was in graduate school, which was the late 1990s, the activists were kind of looked down on as, we're all social scientists here. We're not being... That's simply changed. I mean, most people I know in the social sciences are in the social sciences because they have an axe to grind. And that's true whether they are anti-India or pro-India. They did it because they want to, show how great India is or show how awful it is. They study Islam. Right. They study Islam either because they fell in love with Islam and want to romanticize it, or because they think all Muslims are terrorists and they want to vilify it. They don't just want to study Islam. And that's a real problem. Yeah. And it's not unique to the social sciences, but it is especially strong in the social sciences. I mean, you can find Sanskrit scholars who have no particular opinion on Indian politics. They're much more expert on India than I am, but their expertise is on a technical area of linguistics. You can't find political scientists and sociologists, unfortunately. Now, there are a few, and I've come to respect a few who do study India, but there are a very few.
What triggered that shift of social scientists becoming activists? The Vietnam War, the blatant pointlessness of the Vietnam War kicked everybody into gear that we have to save the world.
I think they were always there, but as long as the social sciences were expanding rapidly, there were lots of jobs, and ordinary people who just wanted an interesting job might go into the social sciences. I mean, if you go back to the 1960s, there were, I mean, where I went at Johns Hopkins, there was an entire, it was set up, Johns Hopkins sociology was set up very late in the early 1980s. And it was ramped up from nothing. No, I'm sorry, 1970s, in mid 1970s. It was ramped up from nothing to a department of 20 people with a separate research center called Center for Social Organization of Schools with another, 40 or 50 staff. There were other research centers associated, all of this being ramped up for, we invented survey research in the post-war era. We invented social science data analysis. I mean, the amount of social science being done expanded so rapidly that people went into it just as a good career. Now, when there are 100 applicants for every job, and I'm not exaggerating, there are 100 applicants for every junior position. You have to be really committed to want to do it. And who's really committed? Well, people who have an axe to grind.
Right. The true believers.
Yeah. And you have nowhere else to pay your salary, right? So, yeah.
What do you think of these days social science being taught in STEM institutions, elite STEM institutions of India? Do you think it's so that people have some sort of knowledge of society, or is it to turn them into activists as well, the scientists?
I mean, one of the most ultra left-wing social science faculties in the world has long been that at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So I'm not sure that it matters much. What matters is getting good people in. And if you can get good people in, you can build a good department. A part of the problem, and I know this goes very far from the material of the book, so we probably shouldn't go too long down this rabbit hole, but part of the problem is that most people who are on the broadly conservative side of politics think it's a good thing to have some diversity of point of view, and are willing to hire. They won't hire a majority of people who are on the progressive side of politics, but they'll hire one or two. They think it's a good idea to have conflict of viewpoints. Most people on the progressive side of politics would never hire a conservative. They'll veto it. They think that's because increasingly, but even going back 20 or 30 years, they vilify conservatism. Well, connecting it, I mean, it's always the Nazi comparison, right? It's always, it's 1931 and we're in Weimar Germany and we can't let our institution fall. And of course, that's never true, but that's how they see it, with the result that over time, departments get taken over one by one. They get taken over by activists. How to prevent that? Well, I hate ideas like, some people are saying that there should be, political quotas, or the departments should have to hire this many people of that side of politics. I don't like any of those solutions. What is the best solution? I'm not sure. My own view is that hiring committees should not come from the department itself. That is, hiring committees should be external. So if you go back 150 years, and you have to go back a long way, but the trustees of a university would do the hiring. not the academics in the university. And so you get a broader social perspective. That is a university seen as a truly public institution, organized and managed by the public instead of being managed by itself. Now,
Okay.
social scientists, actually academics to a person, want autonomy. And they insist that universities must be autonomous, central banks must be autonomous, environmental protection agencies should be autonomous. I actually think that autonomy, unfortunately, ultimately leads to a single way of thinking. It leads them down a path that they become more and more extreme. We've seen that with the CSIRO, Australia's government research institute. It's become, founded as a purely scientific institute. It's become extraordinarily politicized over the last 20 or 30 years. Why? Because they're autonomous. They hire their own people. If instead you look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which runs the census, they're hired. They're not an autonomous organization. They're hired by, in the US, it's the Commerce Department. In Australia, I forget which department the census is in, but they're just civil servants like any other civil servant. And they become, they reflect society more broadly. And that's what I think. We really need fewer autonomous institutions and more institutions that are socially embedded.
Okay, sir, I would really like to continue on this topic, but some other day then. Coming back to VDEM a little, you repeatedly called it, in the beginning of the chapter, you repeatedly call it state of the art. You're very, very appreciative of their methodology.
Yeah.
Then what kind of state of the art procedures come up with such disastrous flaws and disastrous rankings? Why state of the art? Then what's the point of them being state of the art?
Yeah, as the programmers say, garbage in, garbage out. You can get a supercomputer and you can open Microsoft Word on your supercomputer and write complete crap. Right. So it's not having the top quality tool that makes you effective. It's thinking through how your index should work. So the statistical techniques they use are absolutely state of the art. But they're state of the art for doing what they wanted to do, which is, if you have panels of evaluators of different sizes and different evaluators for each item. So they have dozens of items in each country. They have different evaluators. They're not all the same. There are different numbers of evaluators for each item. Item response theory, which is what they use, is an entirely appropriate approach to aggregating those. They do great work on that. If you wanted to know, what do Indian political scientists really think about freedom of expression in India, go to VDEM. The statistical methods are state of the art. However, if you want to measure Indian democracy, is asking Indian political scientists to rate freedom of speech and freedom of association really the best way to measure democracy? Or would I rather know that elections are competitive? So for example, there was one study recently done that looked at, very simply, how often does the incumbent party lose? That's a pretty straightforward measure of democracy. If the incumbent party wins all the time, no matter how beautiful your democratic procedures, most of us feel that's probably not very democratic. Now, around the world, the winning rate of incumbent parties has been declining slightly over the last 25 years. So the world's becoming, is it becoming more democratic? That's hard to say. An incumbent losing isn't necessarily democratic, but I can tell you for certain, if an incumbent never loses, that's not really a democracy. Another way to look at it is the vote difference between the first and second winning party. If those are very close, that's highly democratic. If you look at India, for example, you could say, well, the BJP won 3 national elections in a row. All right. By what margin? Well, the margins are tiny, right? I mean, it's never won a majority of the vote nationally. And if you look at electorate after electorate after electorate, they're highly fought over. They're winning by 300 votes in some cases. These are highly closely fought elections. Well, again, that reassures me that there's a real democracy. Now, these kinds of questions are not asked by VDEM. The VDEM is purely process driven. Was the electoral roll complete? Well, in India, it's not complete. Was there any violence at the polls? Well, in India, there's always some violence at the polls. Now, are these the heart of democracy? No. I mean, to me, these are things that help a country be democratic. But that's not the heart of a democracy. Again, on the freedom of association, are there any banned political parties? Well, in India, there are. They're extremely fringe parties associated with terrorism, but they are banned. Now, does that substantively affect Indian democracy? No, but the VDEM indicator suggests that it does, because India gets a very low score on that, party bans, because India explicitly bans parties. Now, there's a difference between banning the Congress Party and banning a fringe terrorist party. That doesn't enter in, right? So the actual statistics used in VDEM are highly sophisticated. The conceptualization of democracy in VDEM, I think, is completely wrong. They're simply not looking at what we might call substantive democracy, which is, can people change their leaders if they so desire? In India, the answer is clearly yes. I mean, every election is so closely fought. I mean, anyone who follows Indian politics for just a couple of years realizes that there are no blowout elections in India. I mean, even an election where you win a supermajority, like the national election in 2019, that wasn't a blowout. I mean, it aggregated into a large number of seats, but in almost all of those seats, the BJP won a minority of the of the votes, right? I mean, any one of those seats could have gone a different direction if the opposition parties had coalesced differently in alliances and had been able to, there are all these contingencies on which the BJP victory rested. Clearly, you can get rid of your MP if you're Indian, and ultimately, in parliamentary democracy, you get rid of enough MPs, you get rid of the PM.
Then, what suggestions would you make to VDEM if tomorrow you become the head of VDEM? What would you do differently?
So the reason that they'll never reform is that they need to scrap it and start over. If you read their if you read their foundational documents, they started from the work of I'm going to blank on his name, the political scientist.
Something Dal.
Thank you. You just read the book.
Yeah.
So they started from Dahl's work on what makes a democracy, and they went from his lists. He had various lists of 12, 14, 16 items that made a democracy, and they thought, okay, can we operationalize each of these and just go one by one, measuring them? Now, of course, Dahl said that you have to have all of these things, which meant that in theory, they should get a score for each and multiply it through, because if you have a 0 on any of these 14 items, you're not a democracy, because they were necessary conditions for a democracy. Now, that's a completely wrong approach to begin with, because it leads to perverse outcomes. Now, they realized that, so they made half of their index, we multiply them together, 50% weight, and then they made half of their index, we add them together, which has so right at the inception, their index has no theoretical foundation, because it's not based on Dahl ultimately, because they knew that would give them highly fragile results, that just a tiny switch in one indicator could bring a country down from top democracy to halfway down if something went wrong on one of 14 indicators. So right from the beginning, their theorization is flawed. Second, they've left out all substantive measures of democracy. Now, I would much rather see a substantive approach to democracy instead of a formal approach to democracy. I don't want to know that Vietnam's a democracy because it conducts its elections in a very efficient way, or Hong Kong's a democracy because it conducts its elections in a very efficient way. What I really want to know is, can you replace your representative? And if you can't, that's simply not a democracy. So I would prefer substantive rather than formal approaches to democracy. And I would prefer what we call a thin rather than a thick approach. The thin approach to democracy is let's restrict measuring democracy to just the core, can people reject their leaders in an election? And all the ancillary stuff,
Right.
freedom of speech, freedom of the press, let's make that not what democracy is. And the reason I would, and that would be a thick measure of democracy, would say, no, you need opinion forming institutions. You have to have political parties. You have to have freedom of speech. You have to have freedom of the press. You have to have a wide range of views. You have to have, non-corrupt politics. You can't have vote buying. All of these make a country not a democracy. So, no. Those things make a country a flawed democracy. And the reason I'd like to see these separated is that then we could ask, let's say I want to ask the question, is there more vote buying in a liberal democracy or in a...
in Taliban?
No, I was going to go with the electoral autocracy, right? So
Okay.
A high quality democracy or low quality democracy, which one has more vote buying? Well, if vote buying is part of the definition of democracy, then I can't study how one affects the other, right? Are democracies more corrupt than non-democracies? Well, if corruption is part of the definition of democracy, then I can't study these two things separately. So I prefer a narrow, thin measure of democracy,
Right,
as opposed to what you might call the kitchen sink measure, where you just throw everything in, and you find out what you get at the end. Really, and some of the measures of democracy following VDEM are even broader. I mean, VDEM is within the democracy literature. It's criticized for being too thin because people say, well, how can you have a democracy if people are too poor to make decisions objectively? How can you have a democracy if people don't have sufficient education? Well, what if people don't have a university degree? How could they possibly vote in a meaningful way? They can't evaluate policy proposals, right? So they say, well, you're not a democracy unless everyone has a university liberal arts degree, universal basic income, universal health care. And I've seen democracy indices that include all these things as part of measuring democracy. But then you have to, then all democracy means is all the things I like about a society are democracy, and things I don't like are not democracy. And that's a real problem in the democracy literature as it exists in political science. It's just not, it's strayed so far from the substantive, thin, immediate sense of, can you elect your leaders or not, that it's become almost meaningless. It just measures, is a society a good society by the standards of Western Europe, or is it a bad society by the standards of Western Europe?
The arguments you just presented of some people criticizing VDEM for being too thin reminds me of the arguments against free markets or equality of opportunity, saying that it's just an illusion of choice. There's no real choice. How can you even make a choice if you're too poor, etc.? Now, sir, go ahead.
No, that's absolutely right.
Right. Sir, now VDEM came about in 2014, and it was, I think, Open Society Foundation does fund it, right? So should we be
partly, it's a very
about
small part of it. I don't want to go down the Soros rabbit hole because it's a very small part of its funding. As far as I can tell, Open Society just funded a conference that they put together. Its foundational funding comes from the European Union and from multiple European mainstream foundations. I mean, I'm no fan of the Open Society Foundation, but I just don't see its fingerprints here.
What about why the year 2014 specifically then? Is
when
it
was
a
founded?
coincidence?
I think it was just that the political scientist who, Stefan Lindberg, who put together his grant proposal then. This wasn't a top-down effort. This was a bottom-up effort. I mean, this one political scientist at University of Gothenburg, and that's why the VDEM is based at such an obscure university as University of Gothenburg in Sweden. It's not a major university, but this one political scientist who was at Gothenburg, he's an expert on African politics. He put together a grant proposal, put together a team. He got the first grant. They did their exploratory papers. They got more grants, and they got the big European Union grant that allowed them to do the basic statistical work to put out the first VDEM. And they've been off to the races since then. But there's no conspiracy behind this. I mean, it's something I really want to stress, and that I stressed, when I met as I love to say, my guru Rajdeep, when I met him in when I met him in Mumbai for that famous interview, I stressed out that there's no conspiracy here. Nobody sat down and said, how can we get India? How can we criticize India? That was never part of it. This was the good faith effort of a specialist on a European specialist on African politics to measure democracy, who went to the literature, found a highly reputable theory from the literature, Robert Dahl's polyarchy, and said, well, how can we operationalize this? And they did their best to sit down and try to create an index based on it. It just so happens that on that index and the way it all works, India does particularly badly. Now, once VDEM was up and running, it was very convenient that India did badly, because as I said, you have to create a sense of emergency, and there's nothing like, the world's largest democracy is failing to create that sense of emergency.
Right. You have pointed out in the book that before VDEM came out, nobody even thought of India as a bad democracy. So
no, nobody knew.
But even before VDEM came out, I think we were a propagandized society enough to believe that until I had read your book, I did not even know that this never came to my mind, that so many things are actually outside the scope of the definition of democracy, that you are actually pointing out that this does not have to be there in the country to call it a democracy. We always thought that, yes, if a poor person is poor and can't make choices with full agency, then therefore it does not mean therefore it means it's not a democracy.
Yeah, that's because you learned from communist historians. I mean, as you know very well, communists controlled the writing and teaching of history in post-colonial India. And that's always been the communist position, that though the US is not a democracy. Why? Because it has poor people, high inequality. And so the Soviet Union was the only true democracy, because in the Soviet Union, everybody was equal. And we've heard that narrative in the West ever since the 1920s, that, the Soviet Union and later, Mao's People's Democracy in China, that these were the true democracies. And, we heard, I mean, when I was at university, I heard endlessly about Cuba, and that Cuba under Fidel Castro was the true democracy because it had universal health care, and the US was a fake democracy.
Oh my God, Cuba's healthcare. Endless discussions about Cuba's healthcare. Oh
yeah, we hear about it. And look, communist countries did. I mean, let's credit where credit is due. Many communist countries did actually dramatically improve their health statistics over what they had been under their corrupt dictators. I mean, if you compare, if you compare Cuba under Castro to Cuba under Batista, I'm not particularly a fan of Batista, right? I wouldn't say how terrible Cuba became under Castro. But if you try to tell me that Cuba under Castro is better than Florida under the United States, well, no, let's be serious.
Yeah,
but that's where that
what kind of awesome healthcare? Yeah, what kind of awesome healthcare makes you get on a raft and sail seas to get into an oppressive capitalist white supremacist country? What's the point of that healthcare?
Look, that's where the narrative comes from. But look, I really want to give credit where credit is due. The proper comparator. So I did a lot of work on Russia and the former Soviet Union before turning to India. Actually, the trajectory of my academic career has mostly focused on post-socialist transition economies. Initial focus on Russia and East Central Europe, a little bit on Latin America, then on China. For the whole 2010s, I did China, and then in the 2020s, focusing on India. And the communist countries, horrific human rights records. And we don't even have to discuss it, the number of people murdered in prison. Let's just take that for granted. But did the Soviet Union do better than, let's say, Brazil at giving a decent life to its people? I mean, Brazil and Tsarist Russia were at similar levels of development. They had similar levels of, corruption, military rule. Right. Well, how did Brazil fare in the 20th century versus how did Russia fare? Comparing Russia to France is really not a fair comparison. Russia was always poorer and more repressive than France. Comparing Russia to Brazil, all right, the Soviets did pretty well on many metrics. Certainly by the end, by the 1980s, Soviet Union was far better, produced far better outcomes for its people than Brazil did, while having a similar population, similar levels of income. I mean, GDP per capita in Soviet Union was similar to GDP per capita in Brazil. Yet the Soviet Union produced Nobel Prize winners, had decent housing and health statistics. So credit where credit is due. But let's not compare the Soviet Union to the United States, right? I mean, that's just laughable.
So now, moving on to the next topic, one of the more fascinating observations you have made is that BJP is a modernizing force in Indian politics, Indian democracy.
Absolutely.
And you call BJP purely an Indian phenomenon. Why is it a purely Indian phenomenon? Why isn't it just another political party competing in a democracy?
So let me answer the first point first, which is, where I got the impression that the BJP was a modernizing force. I got it from Rajdeep Sardesai. If you read his book on the 2019 election, you read a book about a political party dragging the Indian political system into modern Western style processes, whether that's the use of marketing tools, the use of IT, bureaucratic as opposed to traditional machinery. I mean, the BJP is entirely a modern bureaucratic party, not a family-based party or a caste-based party or a language-based party or identitarian party. It is a modern bureaucratic party using modern tools with the sole goal of winning elections, right? I mean, it's an electoral machine. That's how he described it. Now, he thought that was unfair. I mean, he said Amit Shah came in and made people work until midnight. How uncivilized of him. I almost laughed out loud when I read that in Rajdeep's book, because he thought this was unfair of the BJP, that it was working its workers during election season, working them until midnight. But that's what you do during an election. That's what the Republicans do. That's what the Democrats do in the U.S. You fight hard to win elections. Now, is it uniquely Indian? That's because of its ideology, right? The BJP is the BJP does not have a universalizing ideology. So if we were to compare, let's think to the UK. We have the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats. All of them have ideologies that could exist anywhere. There are conservatives everywhere. There are Labour. I mean, Australia also has a Labour Party, a Conservative Party. There are Liberal Democrats everywhere. The BJP's ideology is rooted in India. I mean, if we're going to use the word Hindutva, I mean, I guess the BJP uses it. We may as well use it as well. Its version of Hindutva is a organically Indian phenomenon, not a global ideology. So it's different from, say, the communist parties in India, who historically, I mean, I know now the communist parties in India have adopted a lot of local Indian and Hindu attributes, but historically the communist parties in India were, had a universal ideology that could be used anywhere. The BJP's ideology is uniquely Indian, and is of the soil in some sense.
Right. Now, our leftists and mainly liberals who think of the word modernity or modernism as a compliment would get, again, very pissed off with you for calling BJP a modernizing force, but they are not aware that you don't actually use it as a compliment necessarily, right? It's just
modern is not a compliment. Nor, on that note, let me bring in the subtitle of the Australian or the Western edition of this book, "The Third World's First Democracy." Third world is also not a term that has, for me, any valence, right? There was the first world was in the historical usage, the first world was the West, the second world, or the capitalist world, the second world was the Soviet resistance to the capitalist world, and the third world was the non-aligned movement, which was led by India, by Nehru's India. There's nothing pejorative about it. Now, if you associate third world with poverty, that's your own business. I don't have these associations. For me, third world means part of the non-aligned post-colonial world. In the same way, is modern good? I mean, it depends how you feel about it, whether modern is good or not. But I mean, I use the example in India. I love the Khan market. First trip to India, first place I went in Delhi was Khan market. I went to Bari Son's books so I could buy books in the Khan market. Khan market's my kind of place. But modern India is in those huge shopping malls in Noida. And those huge shopping malls in Noida, I would bet you that they must dwarf the sales volume of the Khan market. Right. I mean, the sheer volume of sales being, the tie-in with logistics networks, the whole scale of the thing, the huge parking lots, the developing connection to metro lines, right? I mean, it's the modern world. Now, I may like the Khan market, I may have an emotional attachment to it, but the modern world's out there in Noida. Now, modern doesn't mean something I like. Modern means does it use modern tools? Is it organized on a large-scale industrial basis, not on a craft basis? McDonald's is modern. My local Indian takeout is traditional. There's nothing. I prefer my local Indian takeout to McDonald's. I never eat at McDonald's. But is McDonald's more modern? Absolutely. McDonald's is more modern. So yes, the BJP is a more modern party. Does that make them the good guys? Well, depends how you feel about these things. Does that make them the future? Yes. I mean, the same way that McDonald's is going to put my local Indian takeout out of business. And if not McDonald's, then a corporate chain version of, a corporate chain Indian. In the US, this has already happened. You can't go to a local restaurant. If you ever go eat out in the US, you think you're getting a choice of restaurants. In fact, the food service providers for all of those restaurants are the same 2 or 3 companies. You're getting Marriott Food Service is providing, they have a catalog with 30 different varieties of French fries. And when you open your restaurant, you're saying, I want French fries number 9, and I want corn chips number 7, from the catalog. And they just provide you the food, right? It's all on a modern industrial basis. No one's getting potatoes delivered to their restaurant and cutting them up. Even so, it's a modern approach to delivering food. In the same way, the BJP is a modern approach to delivering its ideology. All other Indian parties have to modernize or go out of business. And for a while, it looked like the Aam Aadmi Party might become the modern alternative. I mean, in its early years, it supplanted the Congress in Delhi because it took on modern methods.
Yes.
Whereas Congress did not. But then the Aam Aadmi Party seems to have transitioned into an old style, Kejriwal personal party instead of being, I mean, the difference, and this is something that, again, I'll make sure I really owe Rajdeep a lot. And so I really want to be fair to him. He recently did a episode of his blog on Modi as the high command of the BJP. He misses it entirely in that Modi maybe have control of the BJP machinery, but Modi's not the BJP, right? He's just the person at the top. In the same way Donald Trump's at the top of the Republican Party in the US, Anthony Albanese is at the top of the Labour Party in Australia. Keir Starmer, because he has a massive majority, Keir Starmer runs the Labour Party in the UK any way he wants because he's got a massive majority. But these are all modern political parties. They're not parties of their leader. The leader could die tomorrow and the party will just go on. The Aam Aadmi Party will collapse if Kejriwal dies.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The Congress Party would disintegrate if the Gandhi family were to disappear tomorrow. And
same with Trinamool.
Yeah, Trinamool Congress would disintegrate if Mamata Banerjee were to pass away. You have a heart attack tomorrow and recede from politics. These are not modern political parties operating on a modern bureaucratic machinery. To challenge the BJP in the long run, some other Indian force is going to have to organize on such a basis. Or ultimately, the BJP will just slowly continue to grow. Now, I think it will call into reality its own opposition. We'll see if that happens. It would be a danger to Indian democracy if in the next 20 years, no other challenger arose. But, some challenger will arise. There's always someone who fills an empty space. My own money is on a collection of regional challengers. I think the big mistake that the India bloc made was including the Congress. Everywhere where there was trouble in the India bloc, it was because Congress and the local barons couldn't agree on splitting seats and the campaign. And I suspect what will emerge in India is a federated party. So someone will have the charisma to put together all of these regional parties in India and put them together into a federation of some kind. I called it in the book the mafia, mafia model of politics, where you run Chicago, you run Los Angeles, you run West Bengal, you run Maharashtra, and together we'll just create the Federated Party of India, where we all work together and at the national level. And I suspect something like that will emerge. But who knows? Politics are. We've seen in the UK how Reform Party has gone from nothing to major party in just a couple years. So who knows what the future holds? But yes, the BJP is the modern party in India, and other parties are going to have to adopt its style of organization and techniques of fighting elections, or they'll slowly lose elections.
The post-BJP scenario you just predicted sounds like a nightmare, because my hunch is that it will again lead to those 4-month, 6-month type of governments in the center, and then BJP comes back with a full majority again, because people are fed up with that 4 months of ruckus and chaos. Like it used to happen.
Federation could happen and it could work, but this is all speculative. It's not really at the heart of the book. The book takes on much more challenging issues, and I do want. We've gone over an hour now. I desperately want to take questions from chat. I know you also raised some questions about the Hindu-Muslim issues in the book, and there are a couple chapters. Now we've only really touched the first chapter of the book at this point, so so I'm happy to love to get further into.
Yeah, there's so much to discuss. Oh, and so Academic Man is here now.
Oh, fantastic!
He has also now recently read the book. Hello, Academic Man.
Hello, and thank you for entertaining me today. I confess I have read only the preface and the last chapter for a reason, because I didn't get much time to go through it, although it's fascinating. I did make notes and I have some questions. Something did come to my mind in the last bout of what you were saying. Interestingly, the cadre-based versus leader-based political party thing that you just spoke about. I have, it's interesting that I find the CPIM to be closer to the BJP in that sense, the Communist Party.
Yeah.
The way they organize and the way there's no one family or one leader leading them only at a given point in time, with a few exceptions. I don't know, maybe they'll make a comeback if the TMC is approved.
Well, I should specify though, when I say modern, I don't mean cadre-based. The cadre-based is one approach to a modern organization, but neither the Republican nor the Democratic Party in the US is organized that way. They're organized as federations. There are 50 state parties that come together and nominate a candidate. And that's why we have these spectacles every year of the conventions, because the 50 state parties in the US each have a say in who the national candidate is.
The only thing I think that may impede that development is the problem of families that rule as regional satraps, which was the Congress model. Each wants power on their own terms, power, wealth, and longevity in politics on their own terms, and that always puts them at loggerheads with some competitor they feel is rising somewhere within the party. So anyway, in that sense, it's different. I have a few questions for you, based on my reading of whatever little I have read. So one thing that came to my mind when I was, initially started reading is, because you use a liberal democracy framework, how does the liberal democracy framework fit into the decolonial lens? In the sense that, as you know, that there is a very strong decolonial movement in the social sciences, as well as J.S.I. Deepak's work, and it's pretty popular at this point. And Hindutva activists also typically refer to a decolonial stance when it comes to that. But in that sense, liberal democracy as we know it is a evolution from Europe, or the model of the state that we know, and the model of elections and everything, or fairness, etc., separation of powers, that is typically derived from a modern, European sensibility in that sense. So, do we think of this as being mutually exclusive? Like you can be a liberal democracy and cannot decolonize, or you can decolonize, but then you really don't have a liberal democracy?
So first of all, we now, we've always wondered who Academic Man is, and now he's just outed himself that he probably is at Yale or Harvard, because he just said that liberal democracy is a Western tradition, and any true Indian would tell me, as they have been for the last 3 years, that liberal democracy was invented in ancient India, and that's an ancient Indian invention, and it's been around for 3,000 years in India. Look, all democracies, all real functioning democracies are liberal democracies, and there's tons of academic debate about illiberal democracy, but it just doesn't exist in practice. We haven't seen any illiberal democracies, even to the extent that Viktor Orban insists that he runs an illiberal democracy in Hungary. To the extent that he has been illiberal, he's been non-democratic. Now, Hungary's a exceptional case. I mean, it's on the very extreme of a developed liberal democracy that has implemented illiberal policies. But if you look instead at another classic case that's often criticized in Europe, if you look at Poland, in Poland, the party that was in charge for good 10 years, the PIP, they were an illiberal party, but who ran completely liberal democratic institutions. They wanted to outlaw abortion. Well, that may be an illiberal policy, but they didn't try to prevent criticism in the press, right? So the having a liberal democracy is just part of what a democracy is. Democracies have freedom of the press. Democracies have freedom of assembly. All those freedoms that VDEM loves are real freedoms that are important for democracy. They're just very difficult to measure. I never hear anyone advocating illiberal democracy wanting to get rid of those things. That is, all the illiberal Democrats I read, what they really mean is, well, I'm a conservative, but I still believe in democracy. And it's like, well, there's no contradiction between being a conservative and being a Democrat. Now, if what they mean is to be a nationalist or an ethnic essentialist, well, that's not. I mean, liberals as people may oppose nationalism and essentialism, but liberal democracies can be nationalist and essentialist. I mean, almost every non-English speaking democracy has a sense of itself as being, something essential about the nation. I mean, Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands, 3 of the most liberal countries in the world, 3 clear liberal democracies, have all recently taken stances to prevent non-Western immigration, to insist that immigrants adopt their national languages. So all 3 countries had issues of people in those countries not wanting to learn Dutch, Danish, or Swedish, instead wanting to speak English. Mostly Muslim immigrants from poor developing countries. They said, no, you have to learn Swedish or you have to get out. Same in Denmark, same in, so those are illiberal measures, but those are not illiberal democracies. Those are liberal democracies that have elected ethnic essentialist governments. And there's no contradiction there. So this whole narrative that's developed around the world about illiberal democracy, I just don't believe it. I mean, when Narendra Modi invokes a Ram Rajya, well, that doesn't contradict liberal democracy. That just makes him a Hindutva person, right? It means he's pulling from India's indigenous Hindu heritage for his terminology. Now, if Narendra Modi were to outlaw the English language press and say that all news in India had to be in local languages, okay, that would be illiberal, and India would no longer be a liberal democracy. But I've never seen any motion towards that. I mean, the tiny bit of motion towards that we've seen was this debate over medical education. And most Western social science argues that it's better for universities and medical schools to be taught in local languages, not in English. So, has he become somehow anti-liberal democracy because he wants universities to be teaching in, Hindi and Kannada and Tamil? Well, that's what we as social scientists everywhere except in India, because in India you can't align yourself with Narendra Modi, but for the rest of the world, we teach that that's the best way to run education, and that English language medium education privileges elite students at the expense of talented non-elite students. So, I've seen no motion towards actual illiberal institutions in India or anywhere else that is a genuine democracy.
Interesting.
That is what you have pointed out about the criticisms of J.C. Deepak's book as well, that that same decoloniality literature, which the academics in the West sort of tolerate as a cute puppy who is not very harmless, but the moment it comes from a lawyer who is seemingly from the majoritarian view in the biggest democracy in the world, then it becomes a problem.
Oh yeah, I forget which. Forgive me. I wrote this book. Parts of this book I wrote 3 years ago, and so I forget little segments of it. But there was the one post-colonial scholar who wrote an endorsement for Sai Deepak's book, and then withdrew it because his friends told him.
Walter Di Mignolo.
Mignolo. Because his friends told him, no, that's the bad side in India. You can't endorse them. So, but he didn't know that it was a bad book, right? Because it was a good book until it supported the wrong people. And
my next question
go ahead with your next question. Yes.
Yeah. So you did mention ethnic parties, right, or caste parties. One question that came to my mind is ethnic and I think you did talk about it a bit here as well. If ethnic and caste parties are there in a democracy, can it really be a democracy anymore? That's one aspect of it, because then only certain castes or certain religious groups get a preference, or certain racial groups get a preference. In that sense, because then these parties themselves, the positions they espouse, be it a majoritarian or minoritarian one, these go against the fundamental values of democracy, of equality, and sometimes even liberty and fraternity. So let's say I am a designer of a nation, and I want to keep my nation a modernist liberal democracy and all that. Then should these tendencies of kind of majoritarianism or minoritarianism take at the cost of the rest of the population, should these tendencies be curbed actively to preserve a democracy?
So I take a thin approach to measuring democracy, in that democracy is having a democratic institutions. So you have elections. Can you unseat your leaders? If yes, you're a democracy. I would say that identitarian parties are bad for democracy. They don't make a country not a democracy, but they erode the quality of democratic discourse. And let me take a non-Indian example. The Scottish National Party in the UK, a Scotland-only party that's just about Scottish separatism. Well, it's degraded British politics, because at Westminster, its only issue is Scotland. So if Westminster is discussing, do we want to increase defense spending or put more money into health? It's like, well, we want Scotland. It's like, well, how does that, it degrades the political debate. And then within Scotland itself, of course, it leads to a lopsided polity, where the only issue in Scottish politics is, should Scotland be independent, vote for the SNP? Should Scotland remain in the UK, vote for Conservative Party? But there's no fighting on the issues of how Scotland is governed, right? So those identitarian parties are bad for the quality of democratic debate and democratic policymaking. I wouldn't say they're anti-democratic. So in India, a caste-based party would primarily be looking for advantages for its members of its caste. That's not the same as having a position on defense policy or having a position on industrial policy, right? And so it degrades the quality of democratic discourse. it doesn't threaten democracy. I mean, it only threatens democracy in the final instance if it's so extreme that it's separatist. So the Khalistan, movement threatens democracy. But a caste-based political party doesn't threaten democracy. It degrades democracy.
Right.
This is where this book stands out, I guess, because typically in the social sciences, they, as you obviously know, a lot of people may not know this who are listening. These caste-based parties are heavily celebrated as more vibrant and bringing greater kind of what can I say, democratic dialogue in their opinion. Although we've only seen more and more violence and more, let's say, oppression of other groups. So, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, there is a visible angst against Yadavs and other dominant castes, and then that forms other caste coalitions, and then those castes try to get benefits for themselves. So it fractures the possibility of a healthier dialogue between different people in the country.
Obviously, scheduled caste advancement within the established parties would be more progressive than separate caste-based parties. And the same thing for Muslim advancement, which I hope we'll get to, because I know that, for you, that's been the most controversial part of the book. Muslim advancement within the established parties would be more progressive than the establishment of a separate Muslim party. But neither of them is the end of democracy. It's just, it's a matter of the quality of democracy, not the, not whether the democracy is present or not.
In my
Academic man, any more questions?
Yeah, I have a few. I'm sorry if I'm bombarding, but I had a lot of thoughts while reading the book.
Yes.
Interestingly, Islamic nationalism is strangely modernist, in my opinion, in a weird way, because it is highly organized. They have a very clear set of goals, and it uses modern means whenever necessary. The
Deobandi movement and the Muslim Brotherhood are both modernizing influences in Islam. They're not recidivist movements; they're modernizing movements.
Exactly. Which is why, which I find interesting in the sense that when you do talk about modernizing tendencies in a democracy, in a weird way, Islamic politics does not really fall outside of that modernist spectrum. Although it will obviously it leads to separatist tendencies within India or even Europe, as we have seen, or Israel and other places. But the problem lies in the fact that it's not a feudal thing in the desert as people imagine. So that and it also kind of uses very cleverly a lot of leftist tropes to further its political ambition. So in a weird way,
yes. Screw that. Outside our scope. তুমি question গুলো করো না.
I couldn't. Why suddenly Bengali?
Yeah. Go ahead with the question so that we can take more audience questions later on.
Oh yeah, definitely. So my point of my question was basically that, given that there are possibilities of such extreme discourses within the framework of modern democracy, how do we then curb that? Like, I understand the caste point where you say where it is true that it is not beyond the point, it's not sustainable or separatist, too separatist per se. But in case of the partition, that has been proven that has gone in that direction, where it's gone to a very highly separatist direction and formed two different countries.
Look, inclusion is the only ultimate answer. And if I contrast this, let's say, with the RSS, the RSS is if you wanted to make a word for it, a Hinduist movement, in the same way that the Deobandi movement is an Islamist movement. But because India is 80% Hindu, 85% Dharmic religions, if you want to use that word, having a movement within the Hindu fold really doesn't threaten democracy because it operates within democracy. Right now, if India were instead 20% Hindu, then an organization like the RSS and a party like the BJP that only really attracts Hindu votes, that would be destructive of democracy, because it would be the Hindu party within America or within Canada. But in India, of course, it's not the Hindu party. It's every party's a Hindu party in India, because you can't win in India without winning Hindu votes. So it's not a problem, so to speak. So the challenge is to bring minorities. There's a difference between things happening in the majority community and things happening in the minority community. In the U.S., Republican and Democratic parties are both majority community parties, but who's not included in that majority? Only a tiny fringes are not included in that majority of Americans. The challenge is to bring Muslim voters into the mainstream, as opposed to seeing them splinter off into Muslim-only parties. And India dodged a real bullet with, had India not suffered the horrors of partition, there would almost certainly have been Muslim electorates in a unified India, just as there are still, scheduled caste electorates in today's India. All the pressure was there. Had India not divided, there would be entire electorates that were set aside as Muslim electorates. There would be Muslim parties that voted for those Muslim electorates. Well, India dodged that bullet because of partition, but it still has the challenge of integrating Muslim Indians into the mainstream parties. And if that doesn't happen, then the Deobandis will get together and form their own parties, as they've started to do.
Yeah. I have a final question and one maybe suggestion. My final question was, interestingly, you mentioned the US Civil War in the preface, and maybe even later in the book. Now, recently, the BJP state president from West Bengal, Shamik Bhattacharya, he in a few interviews has said that, we needed a Lincoln-like figure who could unite India irrespective of the civil war that happened in the 46. And that has always been interestingly, I've heard a lot of people like NEERAJAN who've come from Bangladesh, or whose families have come from Bangladesh or Pakistan, who say this, if partition never happened, things could have been maintained. We could have had a country together and stuff. But then it got me to thinking that if the American Civil War was characteristically very different from, the Indian partition-related violence. Furthermore, race and religion, these are very different axes of identities. Racial politics, you can have Mexicans enter the border, but Mexicans aren't the same as a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi entering the border of India. Also, they have many commonalities in terms of religious beliefs, although, again, Catholics and Protestants, but still, they have fundamental similarities, let's say, sectarian differences aside. In that sense, can we compare I know that maybe this is not really a part of the book's discussion, but can we really compare the American Civil War, when it ultimately led to a more unified American country, not USA, as opposed to the partition, if partition didn't happen in India and we could somehow force people to live together?
So I don't make much of the Civil War. I don't make much of the Civil War in talking about unification in the United States. I may have mentioned it at some point, but it's not a major theme of the book. One thing I do pick up in the second to last chapter is the integration of Native Americans into the United States, because I think that is much more parallel to the situation of Muslim Indians, in that these were tribes that wanted to be separate, wanted to have their own polities outside of the United States. They were forcibly brought in, as opposed to Muslims in India had been in India for hundreds of years. But nonetheless, there had to be some way. You had people who the majority community had been fighting with just a few decades previously, literally fighting wars. I mean, not just, it's not like Australia where there were some violence, on the edges of settlements in Australia. There were organized wars between the United States and Native American tribes all the way up till the 1880s. And yet, and I use the example in the book, by 1920, I believe it was, when the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier was consecrated after World War I at Arlington National Cemetery, the final symbol of martial valor that was laid on the grave of the unknown soldier was a Native American war headdress, and not an axe, but a looks like a tomahawk, a Native American stick, and that these symbols of martial valor were used to consecrate a grave of people. Like, there were officers present on that date in 1920 who had fought the Indians, right? I mean, who literally had older officers who'd literally been involved in Indian wars, and yet they were saying, you know what, you're Americans now. Not only that, we admire your courage and martial spirit, and we're appropriating it. And it is what would today be called cultural appropriation. But cultural appropriation is potentially very valuable, because it says, you know what, you're one of us now. We accept. And there's still problems of Native Americans in the United States, but those problems are very muted, and Native Americans are among the most patriotic Americans, and they're highly valorized in many ways. Now, they suffer low socioeconomic indicators. There are a lot of problems on Native American reservations, but no one considers them un-American. If anything, they're the most American of Americans. And I use that as an example for what needs to happen in India for Muslim Indians to be fully integrated into Indian society instead of being a sullen, separate minority.
My one point was that...
Suggestion.
This is the final one. So we, both of us are Bengalis here, and the thing is that in West Bengal has, I think, one of the least impressive stats when it comes to democracy in the post-colonial period. So is it, in a sense, when we are perhaps defending India's practice of democracy, perhaps West Bengal and a few states, but especially West Bengal, stand out as blots. So how do we deal with that? Like, perhaps you can maybe write a paper. I don't know. Like, perhaps we can see more projects in that direction where West Bengal is dealt with separately, or Punjab, especially I think the partition and post, after partition, a lot of the more extremist ideologies were rooted in these states. So in that sense, could these be outliers that we study separately?
I actually was, it's funny you should ask that, because I was considering a follow-up book where I would focus my research on Punjab and West Bengal as legacies of partition. I found their cases very interesting, not only politically, but also economically. That, the metropolis of Bengal is in India. The metropolis of Punjab, Lahore, is in Pakistan, and how that may have affected development in these two areas. I just don't have enough expertise, and I don't speak the languages. I'm not going to learn the languages. I decided it was just that other projects had a better call on my time. But I think it's an interesting research project for somebody to pull forward. That said, about regions not having the same quality of democracy as the country as a whole, I just remind myself that Chicago is a one-party city. The only party in Chicago is a Democratic Party. Alabama has become a one-party state. For the last 30 years, the only party is the Republican Party. So even though there are problems of lack of competitive democracy in particular areas, countries remain democratic nonetheless.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'll be with the members. In the live.
Now stick around, but we do have to get to questions. I promised everybody we're going live and taking questions.
Yes.
So, NEERAJAN, it's up to you.
Yes. I have many members' questions as well. Now we'll get to that main point, I think, which has been the only point of contention from the Indian nationalist side about this book. Is your insinuation that somehow the Hindus are to be blamed? Somehow the Hindus are to be blamed for the exclusion of Muslims. It's only an apparent insinuation that Hindus are to be blamed for the exclusion of Muslims in Indian society. But before we ask your explanation about it, I would like to point out these two statements from you as well, which I don't think many people have taken into account or even read. And these are very important defenses for you as well. So, guys, hear this out. Professor Babones writes that one of the biggest barriers to the full social inclusion of Muslims in India may be the persistence of colonial era Muslim family laws, under which Muslim Indians are governed by different laws from the rest of the society. And also, he writes, the Hindu nationalist argument that Muslim Indians must also come to the table is equally valid. The dogmatically liberal position that Muslim Indians bear no special responsibility to prove their loyalty is morally incontrovertible, but sociologically illiterate. After all, Hindu Indians cannot be forced to welcome Muslim neighbors or even to have Muslim neighbors at all. Pragmatically speaking, if Muslim Indians want to be accepted into India's national mainstream, they have to take positive steps to join it. Even then, sir, every now and then it seems from your sentence construction at least that you blame the Hindus for not including them.
No. There's a difference between fault and responsibility. Historically, Muslim Indians broke up the country. There's no doubt about that. It was Muslim Indians who demanded separation. Jinnah and the Muslim League were very popular. They won elections. Now, they didn't initially. I know it took long, but in the final analysis, in 1947, it was Muslim Indians of 1947 who rioted in the streets, murdered their neighbors, insisted that, well, as the Muslim League said, not Jinnah, but as a Muslim leaguer said, India will be divided or India will be destroyed. Unequivocally, and on top of that, then the Muslim elite left India after partition. We have data on this for two groups, for senior civil servants and for senior military officers. In both cases, more than 95, 98% chose to accede to Pakistan, even when they were from places like Uttar Pradesh or Kerala that remained in India. The Muslim officers built their careers in Pakistan. The Khan market itself, which we talked about earlier, is named for a Congress leader who was anti-partition, but who, when partition came, decided to go to Pakistan, right? So absolutely, if you go back 100 years or 80 years, it was the Muslim Indians of 80 years ago who demanded partition. That said, there are 200 million Muslim Indians today. They're not going anywhere. They didn't kill their Hindu neighbors 80 years ago. They were never born at the time. All the evidence we have suggests that they are Indian, patriotically Indian, want to stay in India. Maybe you can find the one person who rooted for Pakistan at an India-Pakistan match. Well, I'll tell you what, there are lots of Mexicans who root for Mexico at Mexican Americans who root for Mexico at U.S.-Mexico soccer games. They're every bit as American as anybody else. There's no sign of Muslim Indians wanting to live anywhere but India. There's zero out-migration of Muslim Indians other than to highly attractive destinations like the U.S. and Australia, where Hindu Indians also want to go, and Sikh Indians also want to go to the U.S. and Australia. So something has to be done. The question is not whose fault is it. It's nobody's fault today. The question is whose responsibility is it? If Hindu Indians want to live in a country that is peaceful and secure, where all of the citizens of India feel equally valued, well, they're in the majority. They control the major institutions of the country. They have to reach out a hand. If they don't, it's unrealistic to expect Muslim Indians to somehow integrate without any welcome from Hindu Indians. Now that said, on the other hand, someone reaches out a hand, someone else has to grasp that hand. And there has to be some effort from the other side. But ultimately, this is not something that Muslim Indians can accomplish on their own. Yes, Muslim Indians can not engage in terrorism. Well, 99.99% of Muslim Indians don't engage in terrorism, right? They cannot support terrorism. 99.99% don't support terrorism. But can they integrate and become accepted in Indian society? Well, the majority has to accept the minority. It's unrealistic. If Muslim Indians were to say, we welcome Hindus to live in our neighborhood, that's irrelevant because Hindus aren't going to go live in their neighborhood. On the other hand, if Hindu Indians say we welcome Muslims to live in our neighborhood, yeah, then the trickle might start coming in. So it's a matter of responsibility, not a matter of fault or blame. And that responsibility lies with the majority community and the sort of things. Now, I don't think there should be quotas. I don't believe that government should do this.
Right.
People need to do this. And I've used the example, I talked about this before I finished the book, when I was at that India Today conclave in Mumbai. And Rajdeep, asked me questions this, and I looked around and I said, how many Muslims are there here at the India Today conclave? There's no more liberal, progressive environment in India than an India Today event. And yet, the whole time I was there, and I was there 3 days, I only met one visibly Muslim, or from the name on the business card, I could tell was Muslim. Everyone else I met was Hindu, Sikh, or Christian. If even India Today is not making the effort, I think that shows a problem. Now, what could India Today do? Is it fair to require them to have a quota of minimum 10% Muslim? No, I mean that's ridiculous. But could India Today say, you know what, we're going to go out and find Muslim entrepreneurs to bring here. We're going to give them we'll give them a 50% discount if they bring a friend who's also Muslim, right? I mean, could they get Muslim participation in their forum? They could. They don't bother. And it's not just India Today. Of course, India Today doesn't bother. But then if you go to more explicitly Hindu adjacent organizations, if you go to the BJP, they just say, well, they don't vote for us. It's not our problem. To which I point the BJP towards the US Republicans, who used to say that. And then the US Republicans realized, you know what, if we can peel off 40% of the African-American vote, we can win every election. Right? It's all it takes. We don't have to win the African-American vote. If we can just get 20, 30, 40%, and that's how Donald Trump won in 2024. Donald Trump went and did a rally in the South Bronx, 100% black area, of of New York City. The Bronx didn't vote for Trump. New York didn't vote for Trump, but enough African Americans voted for Trump that the entire difference between Trump's vote percentage in 2016, when he won with a minority vote, to 2024, where he won with a majority of the vote, that entire swing was African American voters. Right? And so it's a matter of taking the initiative to reach out, because look, it's your country. Let's face it. I mean, something that international that would make me completely anathema to my colleagues is saying that, let's face it, India is a Hindu country. I mean, every child knows that. Every American school child knows that India is a Hindu country. It's only academics who say, no, India is not a Hindu country. It's a secular, multi-religious country. It's a Hindu country. Well, if it's a Hindu country, if you want Muslims to be part of that Hindu country, there has to be some explicit effort to make them part of it. Going back to Muslim history and finding Muslims who defeated a Hindu king, and instead of saying, look what a terrible guy, terrible guy, okay, fine, don't whitewash history. The problem with Congress historians is they falsified history. They said, no, these Muslim rulers were actually quite liberal. They didn't destroy temples. They didn't murder people. No, be honest with the facts. But you know what? They killed a lot of Indians. But you know what? They sponsored magnificent poetry. But you know what? The greatest poets were Muslim, or the greatest military leaders were Muslim, or take an Indian missile and give it the name of a Mughal emperor, and to say that rah Muslims. And when I say that, people think that's strange. I say, well, look at the U.S. Army. What's the name of every attack helicopter in America? An Apache helicopter.
Native Americans.
They're Native American tribes, because they're trying to say, you know what? We don't want a Native American mode of government. We don't want Native American institutions. We're not going to speak Native American languages, but we admire their martial spirit. So we put their name on a helicopter. And the same thing could be done with a missile system in India today. Right? That's the sort of outreach effort I'm talking about. Now, of course, also Muslim Indians have to then come when you invite them. If India today is giving a 50% discount for you to bring a Muslim friend, the Muslim friend has to say, oh yeah, I'll come. Right? But that's the responsibility that is placed on the minority, the responsibility to accept the hand reached out. Because if you don't reach out the hand, you're going to live in a divided country for the next 500 years. And a divided country that's increasingly Muslim. It's going to be, it'll probably stabilize at around 20% Muslim. You know, it's never, I mean, you could go out 1,000 years and won't be a Muslim majority in India. But it might become 20, 25, 30% Muslim if you look out far enough. Probably 20% by the end of this century. Well, that's a large minority.
Yeah, because even their fertility rates are decreasing.
Yeah, they're both decreasing, but they're still higher than Hindu fertility rates. And, you know, is that the kind of country you want to live in, where you're living alongside people who are sullen, angry, and feel excluded? It's up to you.
Sir, here are the counter arguments. Firstly, it's not like just because their grandparents were going around killing Hindus, they don't have any positive memories or fond memories of that, because even today we see gigantic processions during the burial ceremonies of terrorists like Burhan Wani, Yaqub Memon, etc. The car sevaks were burned to death just 2 decades back. So there are those incidents going on. On the other hand, I think a lot of what you are suggesting that the majority does has been done for the last 70 years. And the response has not come. So today the response basically is that, okay, I'm not extending my hand. You beg for my cooperation. Then I will extend. Then after that, I'll extend the hand.
Look, even if you blame Muslims, I don't blame Muslims. But even if you do, and even if you decide that's the truth, and it's Muslim Indians who are at fault, they're the ones who did everything wrong. They're still doing things wrong. It doesn't change the calculus that it's your responsibility to change it. Because I'm just talking about what will happen. I'm not talking about what should happen. What will happen?
Yes.
What will happen if Hindu Indians insist, you know what, it's a Hindu country now, you better get used to it. You know, we're not going to make any special effort. You're just going to have a divided country with a large hostile minority forever. It's up to you. Look, if I come down with cancer, it's not my fault, and I don't love cancer. But it's my responsibility to learn how to live with it and how to treat it and how to, you know, I mean, I you know, and the option with cancer is you could cut it out, but you can't cut out 15% of your population. So
no,
what are you going to do? You know, it's just the reality. Maybe a better example in cancer, if I have a weak heart, well, I've got to go to the gym. It's not my fault. But nonetheless, I'm the one who has to do something about it. I'm not blaming Hindus. I'm just saying that whoever's fault it is, it's the Hindu majority who has to do something to address it, or accept or repress it. You know, or Hindu Indians are going to have to live in a Israel-style state. I mean, in Israel is the paradigm for this, right? I mean, if you go down that route and say, well, you know, it's a Hindu state, you know, you better get used to it. Well, Israel's done that. Israel's still a democracy. I mean, I'm not anti-Israel, but is Israel the kind of country I'd want to live in, even if I were Jewish? Not really. You know, I wouldn't want to live in a country where I had to be suspicious of every Muslim and, you know, have armed guards and, you know, not trust my fellow citizens. That's not what I would want for my country.
Now, you made a comparison between Karl Popper and Swami Vivekananda in terms of tolerating the intolerant, and I come out supporting Karl Popper in this, not Swami Vivekananda. And I don't think the intolerance of India have received the memo that intolerance is not going to be tolerated. And this is the first time they are being told that intolerance is not going to be tolerated. It's brand new information for a lot of them. And I think we are in the middle of the truth and reconciliation process, which has only begun after 2019, 18. Because of the internet, people sat at home and learned a lot of history and stuff.
Yeah, you're the Bengali, not me. I mean, it was Swami Vivekananda who said that you have to, you have to find acceptance of people's intolerance. Not just you can't just be intolerant of intolerance, as Karl Popper said, because what are you going to do with the intolerant? I mean, Vivekananda had the capacious mind and the understanding, the heart to realize that Karl Popper, he literally said in his book, the intolerant have to be put in prisons if necessary because of their intolerance. It's like, well, again, I mean, how many people are you going to throw in prisons? I mean, again, Israel is the cautionary example. I'm not anti-Israel. I just view Israel as a tragedy in that Israelis have to live in an armed camp. Now, I know it's a difficult challenge. Theirs is much harder because they have neighbors around them that are much more aggressive than India's neighbors. They're a much smaller country, but just like, India faces Pakistan, Israel faces Hamas. But Israel's made its peace with Jordan. It's made its peace with Egypt. It's worked on these things, but nonetheless, it has the fundamental problem that Israeli Jews cannot ever live in peace. I don't think that's how
they have to be on their toes forever.
And that doesn't go on forever. They're going to live in an armed camp forever. And I know it's a tough neighborhood they live in. I don't wish that on anybody, but India's not yet there. India still has this opportunity to find a more liberal, more accepting path forward. India has the fundamentally Hindu heritage to mobilize around that idea of accepting people, even if they're intolerant, even if they're not people you'd like to have. That Israel, with its Jewish heritage, perhaps didn't have in its repertoire. India is also not nearly. I mean, the situation of Muslim Indians is nothing like as hostile as the situation of Muslim Israelis. So it's just not as much of an issue in India. India is only starting to see the formation of Muslim political parties. Israel has had Muslim political parties from the beginning. So I think India can handle this, and I hope India will. It's just something that I wish well for you and your fellow countrymen. But ultimately, you have to decide. India will survive and will be a democracy either way. But if it chooses a Vivekananda-style path towards acceptance, I think it can be a better country. It's my friendly advice.
Two more. Fair enough. Two more follow-up questions on this. One is, what do you think of the argument that this is a negotiation tactic, even because negotiation does not happen by starting out saying that, okay, here's a kilometer, and then I hope that you give me 2 kilometers back. And now what we are doing is maybe taking a kilometer and then negotiating how many inches to give away. Because so far it has been that take an inch. That's how we establish good faith. Therefore, we expect good faith in return, and it has never come.
Well, if you've read the book, and I know you have, I've been very critical of the Congress, the historical Congress Party, in its approach.
India has never required post-independence. India did not require a Muslim party because Congress was a Muslim party.
Congress utterly failed in integrating, despite the intention to integrate the Muslim minority.
Exactly.
It utterly failed in doing so. And it failed because it kept it separate but equal, or even separate but privileged. Right. Congress never pursued inclusion. So when it empowered Muslim leaders, it empowered imams. It empowered Muslim leaders to run Muslim communities. That's very different from getting a Muslim professional into your Hindu-led news organization, or getting a Muslim candidate into your Hindu-led party, or getting a Muslim engineer onto your team in Bangalore or Hyderabad, right? I mean, if running a medical practice, I mean, in India, it gets down to the fact that there are Muslim practices and Hindu medical practices. Can the Hindu medical practice have more Muslim doctors in it, or has it become a separate community? And a lot of the tragedy has been that even among medical doctors, as we saw in the Delhi attack, so Kashmir is a special case in this, but even that, well, they're living in separate parallel worlds as Muslim doctors,
Right.
not as Indian doctors who are Muslim in faith. And it's very different from the US, where, in the US, Muslims integrate very well because they're integrating into majority institutions and nobody minds that they're Muslim. They're just integrated into majority institutions. Now, it's not Hindus' fault that the Muslim intelligentsia left 80 years ago. And the people who are Muslims who are in India now are not the descendants of those intelligentsia. They're the descendants of just ordinary Indian who worked in all walks of life. Well, India needs to cultivate the formation of a new Muslim intelligentsia, or it won't have one. And the Muslim leadership.
I think Modi is trying that.
I don't see the BJP as being a force for inclusion in India. I don't think they've done much.
Okay.
I think there's a moral sense among the BJP and the RSS that it's not their job. Muslims are welcome to do all these things, and we'll celebrate them if they do, but it's not our job. And I've consistently gotten that message both publicly and privately.
Free laptops and stuff, which is
that's
way more than
giving things to Muslims is different. That's what the Congress did, right? I mean, giving things
for Muslim women, empowering Muslim students.
I'm not talking about giving things to Muslims to buy them off. I'm talking about following Vivekananda in bringing people into your community. That's a very different approach that has not been tried, at least not at a national level in India. I'm not familiar with every local or state level initiative that may have existed. But I don't think it's been tried at the national level in India. And I think it's the only path to a normalization of the status of Muslim Indians so that no one ever again says, go back to Pakistan. Because frankly, no one's going to go back to Pakistan. There's nowhere to go back to.
By the way, sir, Muslims
really
integrate very well in. Go ahead. Yes.
It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's whether you like it or not. It just has to be done, or face the consequences of having either inclusion or repression. Vivekananda said inclusion. Popper said repression. You can't just insist. No, don't be the way you are. It's like, well, there's no mechanism for telling people don't be the way you are. Either you include them or you repress them. And that's a choice for India to make.
I think we agree on the goal here. I just believe that the Karl Popper way is the way to achieve the Vivekananda way. And I think Muslims integrate very well into USA because of their First Amendment and the Second Amendment, which we don't have. If we have the First Amendment and the Second Amendment in the same way the USA has, they would integrate very well here as well. Every home has an AR-15, and you can say anything you want. They will integrate in 5 days. The second follow-up question is, sir, you said that there aren't any rich, successful Muslims seemingly, but then the entertainment industry, where they are ready to shake the hands, we are appreciating them all the time. There are no dearth of incredibly famous, popular Muslim musicians, classical musicians, popular
exactly
musicians,
the same in the US
actors, directors. Yeah,
exactly the same with African Americans in the US. They've always been
because they are
successful in it.
extending the arms there. They are extending hands there in those industries.
Entertainment is a unique field, and I don't know why, but historically, marginalized groups have been consistently successful in entertainment around the world. Why that's whether it's gypsies playing music in Europe or African Americans playing music. I don't know why that's the case, but sports and entertainment, maybe because they're purely talent based. I don't know, but sports and entertainment are not the whole society, and it's missing in the rest of society. I mean, African Americans were very successful in entertainment long before Jim Crow ended, and segregation ended in the United States.
Yes. Now we start taking audience questions.
All right, let's go.
Firstly, my member questions.
Absolutely.
Neon is asking, why are rankings and reports from organizations like VDEM and Pew Research not part of political discourse of other countries? India's rankings are constantly brought up by not only foreign media and academia, but also domestic ones. How likely is it that there is some agenda to destabilize the current government and system?
Yep. In the book, I literally call them the India rankings because we don't care about them in other countries. And I'm going to find the reference in the books. I have some data on that. I have a whole section in the book called the, quote, India rankings. And that's because these rankings have been weaponized with regard to India, and in India's internal politics, nobody cares about the VDEM ranking in the rest of the world. And I have some data on this, the number of mentions, and I'm going to see if I can just quickly find it. If you can look for it, it's on page 30, following page 30. And it's overwhelming, the number of times people mention India, mention VDEM with regard to India. And I think ultimately the reason is that India is a poor country that's a democracy, and there just aren't others. So here I have, over a 5-year period, when I was writing the book, VDEM rankings were mentioned in 853 articles indexed in ProQuest. 401 of those articles mention India. So roughly half of all articles that mention VDEM at all mentioned it in India. And that's not because there are a lot of Indian newspapers in ProQuest. The only one is the Times of India. Otherwise, ProQuest is full of newspapers from around the world. So the problem is India is just about the only poor country that's a democracy. And thus it's problematized in India. Everyone accepts that, Denmark and Canada are democracies, so no one cares what their ranking is. Australia does badly on the freedom of press rankings. Nobody cares because no one worries, does Australia have freedom of the press? They assume that it does. In India, nobody knows. I mean, no one in America knows is India. They know India is the world's, India is where Hindus come from. They know it's the, quote, world's largest democracy. Does India have an electoral dictatorship under this, harsh-looking brown man named Narendra Modi? Maybe it does, right? How does an American know? I've met Australian journalists, professional journalists, who are convinced that India has no freedom of the press. Why? Because the World Press Freedom Index told them so. Now, when I point out to them that Australia scores much lower than New Zealand, they say, oh, that's ridiculous. New Zealand is a highly controlled press. There's only one government TV station. There's no independent TV news. There's only one newspaper in the entire country. There's no diversity. Everyone knows Australia has a freer press than New Zealand. They don't care that the ranking shows New Zealand higher. They have their own personal experience. People don't have their own personal experience of India. To them, it's just another, well, I'll use the word from the book's title, it's just another third world country. And we assume that all third world countries are corrupt dictatorships because that's what most of them are. So we rely on rankings for India in a way that we don't rely on rankings to know about Germany or America. And that's why VDEM has extraordinary importance for India, and it doesn't have importance for other countries. I mean, it's kind of like the everyone gets angry about the food index, the World Hunger Index, and again, it's a big issue, and it's like, well, no one in America cares about the World Hunger Index because it's just not an issue. On the other hand, if you were to flip the World Hunger Index and call it the World Obesity Index, because literally the World Hunger Index is the World Obesity Index, it's just the opposite ranking, well, then we would say India is doing so well. Look at the US and Australia doing terribly on this World Obesity Index. Because we're concerned in America about obesity, and it would hit the US newspapers if it was called the Obesity Index. Same sort of thing. It's just, it's no one cares about these issues with regard to other countries. They only care about it with regard to India. And frankly, no one in Saudi Arabia is upset that Saudi Arabia is low ranked on the democracy indices.
Another question from the same person. If India has proven to be an exception in the third world, what should the other third world countries learn from Bharat? Can they emulate it at all? Or is this phenomenon unique and is fated to be unique to only India forever?
What countries need to be democracies is a strong civil society. And the central thesis of the book is that India is a democracy because there is a very strong Hindu civil society in India. And with Hindus making up 85% of the population, that means that there's a strong civil society in India, because most of India has a very strong civil society. Other third world countries have not developed strong civil societies, and they need to. Now, I didn't make this sufficiently theoretically clear in the book, but the reason the book called Dharma democracy is the idea that a democracy of duties is something that is likely to appeal much more in third world countries than the idea of a democracy of rights. All democracies have rights and duties. I've been criticized for this by Westerners, and it's like, look, we have duties in Australia, they have duties in America. It's just not what we talk about. I'm not saying that, we should have no rights in a democracy in the developing world. What I'm saying is that the narrative that it's your duty to the country plays much better in poor countries, as what's the narrative of rights plays much better in rich countries. And I think that civil society organizations focused around duty. Now let's take the largest, most influential civil society organization in India, the RSS. What is its narrative? It's entirely a narrative of duties and obligations. Nothing in the RSS narrative is about your rights as an Indian. It's all about your duties as an Indian, your duties as a Hindu. And in the same way, I think civil society organizations that emphasize duties, and here I'll make the explicit example of the Muslim Brotherhood. I think that Egypt could have built a functional, it wasn't going to be Switzerland, but Egypt could have built a functional democracy under the Muslim Brotherhood, which had extensive civil society networks in Egypt. It was, had a strong narrative of duties and duty to both the nation and to Islam. But the liberal elite were unwilling to live with that, and they worked with the military to repress the Muslim Brotherhood and end Egypt's democracy before it ever started. Right? I mean, it took like 1 year after the Arab Spring for Egyptian democracy to be suppressed. It was never given a chance. Now, would the Muslim Brotherhood have built a democracy of duties in Egypt? I don't know. It may have not succeeded, but it had a better chance to succeed than Egyptian liberals. Egyptian liberals inevitably had to build a dictatorship, a liberal dictatorship, not even very liberal, but they had to build a dictatorship in Egypt because a true democracy would never espouse their values, would never let them be who they wanted to be. And I think Egypt's a cautionary tale. But, would a democracy of duties work well? Can civil society be built around duties? That's all exploratory. I should have written in more depth about that theoretically in the final chapter. I didn't. But that would all be speculative anyways to what other countries can learn.
Sir, I'd like your opinion on a view of mine. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and I should say that it's not that I think civil society is uniquely Hindu. Nepal has not succeeded as a democracy. It's been a very unstable democracy. It's that in India, the place where civil society developed was in the Hindu community. It's not that being Hindu makes you have a strong civil society.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I am as apprehensive about your, let's say, almost fanboying over duties as any Western scholar who hates India, because as a libertarian, I also believe that the moment anyone brings up duty, it's a way for the politicians to get away from doing their actual duties, because then everything gets pushed on the shoulders of the populace that, no, it's your duty, you do it for the country. Meanwhile, they are in their palaces smoking a cigar. So is there any way to do both, or is it, sir, you are pointing out that in a situation where India's poverty is, their only duties would make sense. But we are probably poor because people are obsessed with duties and are not holding the politicians accountable enough.
Look, it's a matter of context. Every democracy has to have rights and duties. That's obvious. Why didn't the military take over India in 1976? Well, they had a very strong
I
sense
have no
of
answer
duty.
to this.
I don't have a firm answer either, but the only answer I can come to from reading literature on it is that they had a strong sense of duty of doing what was demanded of them as professional soldiers. And what was demanded of them was obedience to civilian government, with the constitutional duties they held. Thus, when Indira Gandhi asked the military to provide water trucks for one of her rallies, that's when they stood up to her and said, no, it's not the duty of a military officer to provide water for your political rally, right? Now, can you only have duties in democracy? Obviously not. And I think and I've explicitly criticized in the book Nehru's First Amendment, and I've contrasted the U.S. First Amendment says absolute freedom of speech. The Indian First Amendment introduced limits on freedom of speech, and I think India's Ambedkarite constitution was a better constitution than India's Nehruvian constitution, which is really the constitution that has ran India until the BJP has just started tweaking the constitution with Article 370 and all that. But so I'm very much in favor of individual rights. The question is not having the rights. The question is what is the narrative that inspires people? And I think that in developing countries, it's much more inspiring. And I'll make it very practical. If USAID still existed, should it be giving its money to a gay rights group in Uganda or to a Christian church group in Uganda? The Christian church group is going to use the money to teach abstinence to young teenagers. The gay rights group is going to use the money to teach young teenagers that they can embrace their sexuality and do what they want. Neither is anti-democratic or pro-democratic, right? I mean, we need to get out of our heads that being gay is pro-democratic and being Christian is anti-democratic. There's nothing like that, right? The question is, which one would help build a stronger civil society in the country? And I suspect giving the money to the abstinence-promoting Christian group, whether you believe in abstinence or not, that's going to do more to build a sense of respect, a sense of obligation, a sense of self-restraint in society. And I think what Uganda needs is a lot more of that. In the US, yes, we could have a lot more self-expression because our democracy is already so firmly established that we can do that. Now, again, I'm not talking morals here. Personally, I'm much closer. I live in the gay heart of Sydney. I live in in almost a half gay building. I'm profoundly comfortable with gay rights groups. I'm surrounded by them. There are literally rainbow flags on every cafe outside my door. That's fine. I'm not very close to Christian conservative abstinence teaching groups. It's not a matter of which one I prefer or which one is better. It's a matter of analytically, which one would help build a stronger civil society that would protect Uganda the next time an Idi Amin rises to power. Yeah, I suspect those Christian church groups are going to do much more to protect Ugandan society, whereas the gay rights group, they're going to flee the country, and try to get to the US and become refugees. That's my suspicion.
Have you had a chance?
Yeah. Have I had a chance?
Have you had a chance to go through the Savarkar's Hindu Mahasabha draft constitution as well? Did you check out its rights?
I've looked at it, but I haven't. I don't know it in detail. I'm sorry. I know of it, and I don't really remember it.
Okay. Another question from a member. You are dismissive of the civilizational state narrative for India. Why is that? India is not an ethno-linguistic nation state for a religious state. So then how would you define India if not a civilizational state? If the basis of the state is the common Indian civilization that underlies and threads the various disparate identities of Indians.
Yeah, there are no civilization states. It's a narrative that people love. Ironically, the very term civilizational state, was invented by a Congress intellectual who was the president of the Nehru Library, attempting to create the idea of the composite culture in India, that India was a composite civilization of Mughal, Hindu, and British, colonial, fused together in a uniquely Indian civilization, and he called it an Indian civilizational state. It was popularized by Martin Jacques with relation to China. He was wrong too. China is not a civilizational state. China is a Han Chinese ethno-nationalist state that is repressing non-Han Chinese groups Throughout the communist period, Manchurian culture has completely disappeared. Cantonese culture in the South is disappearing. Muslim culture, they're incredibly repressive of Uyghur Muslims. Now, they love the narrative. Oh, China is this civilization that spreads out along the Silk Roads to Asia. And what are they doing? They're sending Han Chinese to put Uyghurs in prison camps, right? I mean, it's an ethno-nationalist Han nationalist state. Is India a civilization state? Well, what does it mean? In my reading of the entire civilizational state literature on India, it fundamentally comes down to we're jealous of China. China gets to be a civilizational state. Everyone loves the Chinese civilizational state narrative. We want to upgrade and be a civilizational state too. And the fact is, China's not a civilizational state. India's not a civilizational state. If it's India has, and I quote Pavan Varma on this, a great Hindu civilization. India's civilization is fundamentally Hindu. Again, that can be clipped by somebody and shown that I'm Islamophobic. That's ridiculous. Every school child knows that India is a Hindu country. Right. That said, what about Angkor Wat? That's part of Hindu civilization. That's not in India. Buddhism is part of Indian civilization. Yet where are all the Buddhists? Oh, in Tibet and Vietnam. Why aren't they in India? And if you're going to say, no, it's much more restrictive, it's only the heart of Hindu civilization, then it's like, well, why is Manipur in India? And why don't you just withdraw from the Northeast and let it become independent, since they're not part of this core Hindu civilization? It's like the core Hindu civilization happens to cover all of the places that are currently in India and nowhere else. That's ridiculous. I mean, either India is a civilizational state because it's going to expand. Let's take the Russians. The Russians take civilizational state very seriously. That's why they invaded Ukraine. It's Ukraine, on a nation-state basis, it's a separate nation. It's a separate national community. Is it part of Russian civilization? Absolutely. There's no doubt that Ukraine is part of Russia's broader civilization. So they invade Ukraine. They take that narrative seriously. Is India going to invade Sri Lanka? I mean, Sri Lanka is part. I mean, you have the whole Ramayana, right? I mean, if Sri Lanka is not part of Indian civilization, if Nepal is not part of Indian civilization, nowhere is, right? So people love the narrative. They never want to follow through on the implications of that narrative. It's a fantasy that is something that is very attractive to people, I understand, but it has no practical meaning in today's world.
Okay, now, sir, a series of questions from one member, so please be patient. On indices, I've noticed a weird double standard with my capital L liberal friends. They treat the Freedom and Freedom House rankings like holy scripture to downplay India's success. Yet when I bring up stats like rape rates or crime rates per 100K, where India actually performs better than many Western countries, they suddenly pivot to cultural oppression and ignore the data citing unreported incidents. Regardless of how many stats I show them, including India being the second highest country with most false cases registered. How does India stop these biased global indices from being used as political weapons by local elites or by people in general as a stick to beat the culture and government?
Look, Freedom House was explicitly created by the United States government as an index of United Statesedness. As what it measures is how American is a country. On top of that, it has some serious methodological problems. So, for example, many of the Freedom House measures are framed as, has something ever happened? So has any journalist been imprisoned? Yes, well, then you're down points. So Freedom House is just a poorly constructed index that has gone along because it was poorly, kind of like VDEM will be in 50 years. Freedom House was badly constructed in the 1970s, but because it's been there since the 1970s, it continues to be badly constructed today. The good news for everyone is it's likely to go out of business soon because U.S. government funding has been pulled from it. And, but look, it's not a terrible index. It's just not a really good index. That said, there are good things in it. I mean, if you ask, does India have the same levels of freedom of speech as the United States? Clearly not. Now, I'm a fan of freedom of speech, but does India perform well in that? No. But things always reflect biases. Something I always tell Australians: no one here, when they talk about freedoms, no one mentions like you did earlier, freedom to own firearms. Now, that used to be considered a fundamental freedom in the United Kingdom and United States going back to the 17th century. Well, why is that not in your freedom index? Well, it's not there because the kind of people who make freedom indices are opposed to freedom to own a firearm. And so they don't include it in their freedom index. So all of these are contingent on, are things like what we as a liberal elite like. Now, that said, there's value in Freedom House. I mean, I share most of the values there. I think most of you would share most of the values there. It's a flawed index. It's not a terrible index. I mean, VDEM is a terrible index. Freedom House has some methodological flaws in it, but it does get at basic ideas of freedom. It just does so with methodological problems.
Okay, next question is on the second chapter in the book. And so for those of you who haven't read the book yet, he has an amazing, incredible chapter on Yogi Adityanath.
Yeah, on the
question is on Yogi and security. You call Yogi an Islamophobe despite his liberal policies, but given India's history with suicide bombers, radical elements, and communal violence, isn't the state's stance a rational reaction to a specific religious reality rather than just a phobia? To rephrase it, is it intellectually honest to call a leader a phobe when they are reacting to a documented multi-decade reality of radicalization? At what point does security common sense get mislabeled as bigotry in the Western sociological framework?
I'm afraid of violent people. It's a rational fear, but nonetheless, it's still a fear of violent people. Now, is it rational? If I were in an American context, is it rational? I have a brother-in-law who's African-American, and he and I joke about it because my sister will, anything about African-Americans, like, no, you can't discriminate. And he'll freely say, no, if I go to downtown Newark, I would lock my doors and not let my kids get out because, it's an all-black city. And, so we're all, and that's the lesson of critical race theory, is that critical race theory gets a really bad rap, but the academic heart of it really is just that we all incorporate these racisms, even if they're rational, they still become incorporated. It doesn't make them, doesn't mean they don't exist just because they're rational. Now, I'm not going to get into a discussion. I don't have the data to get into a discussion. Is it rational to be afraid of Muslims in Uttar Pradesh? I don't know. I mean, when I've traveled there, I mean, I'm not conscious of who's Muslim and who's not. And so I'm not afraid of Muslims in Uttar Pradesh because it just doesn't enter my mind. I can't visually discriminate a Muslim area. I mean, I was walking around, how can I forget, capital of UP, Lucknow. I was walking around Lucknow and I was walking around Varanasi, and both times, like, I don't know who's Muslim and who's Hindu. But Hindus and Muslims can much more easily identify each other, and there is phobia. But the Islamophobia of Yogi Adityanath is very clear in his remarks, right? If you look at his language and his speeches, or if you look at even the so in the book I write about the anti-Romeo policy and the love jihad policies. Well, the whole narrative of love jihad is an Islamophobic narrative. It might be true that some Muslim men prey on Hindu women with the idea of converting them through rape. But calling it a love jihad is clearly Islamophobic. I mean, calling it instead sexual assault is a neutral terminology, or coerced marriage is a neutral terminology. So the law itself, I defend the law in the book, and I said, look, it's a good law. It's a liberal reform. It protects women. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. What's wrong is the narrative that was used to sell it. That is, and I call it in the book, instrumental Islamophobia. That is, it's playing on people's prejudices to say, vote for me, I'm going to keep those people down. And I think he does do that. Whether literally or dog whistling, he's clearly playing to a Hindu fears of Muslims. Those fears may be substantiated. That's beside the point. He's still playing to those fears. It's Islamophobic. Even if it's rational Islamophobia, it's still Islamophobia.
Right. But doesn't the word phobia inherently mean it's irrational?
No, phobia is a fear. It's not an irrational fear. It's just a fear. if you're
Okay.
afraid of sharks, well, that's rational to be afraid of sharks, but nonetheless, you have a fear of sharks. And I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to, I'm not going to the technical meaning of the term, but it is not rational to be afraid of all Muslims because some Muslim once beat up some Hindu. After all, some Hindu also once beat up some Muslim. And that's why I tell people, and I distinguish in my writing between, a lot of Hindus have tried to adopt the term Hindu phobia. There's no Hindu phobia. There's organized anti-Hinduism, right? Because Islamophobia exists because people have a fear of Muslims because there are Muslim terrorists. They're very, I mean, ever since the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka, I mean, there used to be Hindu terrorists, but now there's essentially no Hindu terrorism. So we don't have Hindu phobia. We have anti-Hinduism in the world. Well, is it rational to be Islamophobic? Maybe in certain contexts it is, but that doesn't change the fact that people are Islamophobic. And that the yogi,
and to be fair,
as a politician who represents all of the people of Uttar Pradesh, it's particularly incumbent upon him not to stoke fears of fellow citizens, but instead to quiet those down.
And in defense of Professor Babones here, that chapter is not just about criticizing Yogi for being an Islam.
Oh, not at all. It's about educating people. Originally, it was the first chapter of the
full
book.
of appreciations for Yogi as well.
Oh, yeah.
On
Originally,
understanding
it was the first
stats,
chapter
when
of the
looking
book.
at
because I wanted to educate Westerners about India, and I thought, how could you better introduce the West to India? If you introduce the West to India through Narendra Modi, well, Modi's he's an interesting character, but there are people who come from modest origins to become leaders of their country all over the world. There are no yogis or bishops, Catholic bishops, or imams, who rise to become democratically elected leaders. And he's uniquely Indian. And I wanted to use it as a way to teach about India and to teach that, and to teach about the vilification of India, that policies that we would embrace if they came from liberals, people are condemning because they come from the yogi. And so I actually think a lot of his policies have been very positive for Uttar Pradesh, and they're very positive liberal reforms. But Western audience or Western intellectuals find it unpalatable that because they're coming from this monk in saffron robes.
On understanding stats, when looking at demographic disparities in crime statistics, for instance, 2.1x more Muslims per 100K compared to Indian non-Muslims, we see two irreconcilable narratives. One side cites inclination, while the other side cites systemic oppression. As a quantitative sociologist, how do we break this deadlock? Is there a data-driven way to control for socioeconomic variables to determine if these disparities are a result of judicial bias or if they reflect a deeper failure of social integration that exists independently of the state?
Yes, the best thing you can do is look at murder statistics. The problem with all other statistics is that they are prone to manipulation. They depend on selective enforcement. Murder, you can pretty much assume in almost every country that all murders get investigated. Most murder cases get solved. I know there are unsolved murder cases, but murder is taken seriously, and it's very difficult to fudge murder numbers. Whereas it's very easy to fudge theft. You can either choose to book the theft or choose not to book it. All murders get reported. All murders get investigated, except in times of civil unrest. I don't know the stats on Muslim versus Hindu perpetrators of murder. I would not be surprised if the Muslim rates are higher. Throughout the world, communities that face social exclusion have worse crime statistics. So I would expect, again, I don't know the data. I'm not a criminologist, but I would expect that rates of criminality among Muslim Indians would be higher than rates of criminality among Hindu Indians, just based on universal processes, not based on any knowledge of India. We have the same debate in Australia. Does that, is that ultimately because of the culture of the Muslims, because of the structural history of where Muslims stand in Indian society, that's an unresolvable question. The same question applies to African Americans, applies to Aboriginal Australians. We don't have an answer for it. You can control for income level, education level. It doesn't matter. In America and Australia, there's still higher rates of criminality among these minority groups. And I suspect it's true of Muslim Indians, although I don't know that.
Okay. On Mazzini, it's wild that Gandhi, Savarkar, and Aurobindo, who hardly agreed on anything else, were all obsessed over Mazzini. Was it Mazzini's concept of duties over rights that resonated with the Indian concept of Dharma, or was it simply his successful blueprint for transitioning from a geographical expression to a unified nation state?
So Mazzini wrote a book called The Duties of Man that made him a global intellectual celebrity, and he explicitly contrasted it to the Rights of Man, which was the document in the French Revolution that inspired the French Revolution and became part of the French Constitution. He flipped it on its head and said Duties of Man. And all of them admired his approach, which was a duties-based narrative to nation building. I think that Mazzini is his intellectual output is a great tool for building a sense of national unity. Rights are fundamentally individual. I have a right to do something. My duties are obligations to others. And that duties hold people together is a very Mazzinian idea. It was very popular in colonial India. Now, partly that's also due to the fact that he was a much bigger intellectual pre-World War I than he is now. And so everyone had read Mazzini pre-World War I. Today, he's not much read. So it leads to this odd situation. But Bipin Chandra Pal had a series of great men of the world. And, in his series were literally Krishna, and I forget who else, Jesus Christ, I forget who else was in it. And the only mortal man who was in his series was Giuseppe Mazzini.
On street power, a central theme of your work is the Raj Dharma of the state. However, many argue that the Indian state is only secular because it lacks a monopoly on violence, often yielding to the street power of specific groups while regulating others. How can a Dharma democracy ensure a truly neutral public square where religious exclusivity is treated with the same legal scrutiny without the state appearing to favor one form of assertiveness over another? To use a real-world anecdotal evidence, every day in namaz, it's announced that only one God is valid. If Hindus in India or Christians in Christian-majority countries said something similar, the state would freak out. Does the state only tolerate certain things because one side has the street power to start a riot and cause violence, whilst making sure there's global condemnation on any retaliation?
I'm not really much of an expert on street power and riots, but I will say that I really want to distinguish between democracy and a good democracy. Even if India were to become a Hindu Raj, an explicitly Hindu country, that wouldn't prevent it being a democracy. It would just make it. I mean, Israel's a democracy. It's a explicitly Jewish country. The U.S. is a democracy. It's an implicitly Christian country. Australia is an implicitly Christian country. So I don't think it would be such a problem. Now, whether street power is a check on democracy, I mean, a check on authoritarianism, I should say. It might be. I haven't really thought much about it, I'll be honest. It's a provocative thesis, but ultimately, I think not. I think that, we overestimate the importance of these protests. I mean, after all, look at the Farm Bill protests that went on in India for a year. I mean, how long did the blockade go on the Haryana border with UP? And the only reason it ended was that Modi had an election he wanted to win in Punjab. And so, so he withdrew the laws, to try to have a chance at winning an election in Punjab. But, I think we overestimate the importance of street power in well-institutionalized democracies, because street power is so influential in badly institutionalized democracies. I mean, yes, street power overthrew Sheikh Hasina, but was Bangladesh really a democracy? I don't think so. Street power overthrew Mubarak in Egypt, but Egypt wasn't a democracy. I don't find democracies where street power overthrows governments. So, I'm a little skeptical of it all. But honestly, I haven't
Right.
studied it. It's just not something I've paid any attention to.
He has written that some more unrelated directly to the book, but based on the interviews I've heard from Professor Babones, on temple and Hindu institution control, you talk about Dharma democracy, but how can India be a real secular democracy when the state controls Hindu temples and their money, but lets mosques and churches run themselves completely private? There's also Article 25 to 30 in the Constitution that excludes the minority institutions from any other acts post Article 31, like the right to education or affirmative action reservations in minority-run institutions, whereas a Hindu institute is always subject to the mandates. I know you haven't had the best of debates with Anand Ranganathan, but he has dedicated 2 chapters in his book, Hindus in Hindu Rashtra, in the points I'm making.
So first of all,
also in several Indian states, Hindus are the actual numerical minority, yet they don't get any minority protections. Doesn't this prove that the Indian version of secularism is just a one-way street?
So first of all, the Indian state does not control Hindu temples. In some states, temples come under state control. Right. So let's first be clear about this. This is not a national institution where all Hindu institutions are run by the state. That's just not the case. Those states that have Hindu institutions that are state institutions, that's a institutional survival of an earlier era. After all, if you were to go to the UK 200 years ago, all churches were run by the government. I'm sorry, all the Anglican churches were run by the government, whereas the Catholic churches were independent. And ultimately, over time, there has been a separation, but still King Charles is the head of the Anglican Church, and bishops have to technically be appointed by the prime minister, right? So these are historical survivals, not not things that are at the heart of democracy. Do I think India would be better if the Indian states, and I believe, are they all southern Indian states that have state-run temples, or are they mostly southern states? You would know better than I would.
Mostly southern.
Yeah, that is in West Bengal, there are not government-run temples, are there?
There are now.
There are now? Okay, so again, I don't know. I'm not that read up on it.
Yeah.
But it's not a national phenomenon. All temples. Now, if it were the case that all temples throughout India were government-run, I would see the argument. If there were pressure to nationalize all temples and make them government-run, I would see the argument. I think it's clear that government-run temples are a historical survival that will, over time, slowly disappear. The reason they haven't disappeared is that governments are addicted to the money they bring in. Governments are addicted to the political power they provide. But I don't think that's the future. I don't think there's a tendency towards that in India. Again, I just think it's a bit of a red herring. Certainly, I don't think Hindu temples should be government-run in India any more than mosques should be or gurdwaras should be. The fact that they are as a survival of a time when India's princely states ran their own temples is just a historical curiosity, and it's going to eventually disappear with time.
Okay.
And it's just not the heart of Indian politics, right? I mean, I understand if you're in Tamil Nadu and it's a huge issue that the communist government is running your temple, it's maybe very powerfully important to you. It's not determining the direction of national politics in India.
On the English gatekeepers, why is it that the quote-unquote international view of India is always just a copy-paste of what a few thousand English-speaking elites in South Delhi think, while the actual voters on the ground are ignored? To rephrase it more academically, how do we break this feedback loop where a few thousand elites are allowed to curate the narrative for 1.4 billion people? Is there a quantitative way to prove that these experts are totally out of touch with the actual democratic pulse of Bharat, or is the international media simply too dependent on these English-speaking gatekeepers to ever change? And is that by design to serve the vested interests to peddle the same narratives?
The people who have to change it are people like me, and unfortunately, people like me don't seem to want to change it. When you go to a conference in the US or Australia, and if you go to a panel on China and there are China experts up, there are a bunch of people like me who study China for a living. Some of them might be sympathetic to the CCP or something, but some of them are anti-CCP. In any case, they're people who study China. They've cultivated a knowledge of it. Whenever there's an India panel, they just get a bunch of Indians. to serve on the panel. And I've seen this repeatedly in the US and in Australia. All you have to do to get expertise on India is, get someone from the Indian diaspora. They're the expert on India who tells you about India. And as long as that's the case, that is a problem, because who is likely to be on that panel on India? Those same 3,000 people you just you just talked about, because they're the ones who are most connected with Western media organizations. That has to change, and there has to be actual expertise on India. Now, some people, and I don't know why he disappeared, like unconventional sociologist, as people like that, as this next generation of academic experts comes up, maybe they'll be able to change that. There is a lot of motion within India and in the diaspora of Indian PhD students who are not part of that old English Stan core, who are challenging those beliefs. They've now become dominant in places like business schools and engineering schools, where, if you were to get your India experts, just find a random Indian from a medical school, they're likely to have a much more balanced view of India than an Indian sociologist. It will change with time, but it really, part of the problem is that there are a bunch of gatekeepers. They actually have an organization, the South Asian Studies Scholar Activist Collective. There are a bunch of activists in academia, in Western academia, who gatekeep on everything to do with India, that only the right kind of Indians should get access to things like pursuing a PhD. I mean, look at Vikram Sampath. He's a great example. He's very much opposed to that historical Congress narrative, but he had to do his PhD in music history. And he's a PhD credentialed historian. But if he's studying music, maybe he can be tolerated in an Australian university. If he wanted to do his Savarkar biography in an Australian university, he'd have a lot of trouble doing it.
Right. Of course.
So there's some change going on, but it is a problem that we just rely on the Indians we know. And who are the Indians we know? They're the usual suspects.
Now, we have pretty much covered all the questions that the audiences were going to ask. Now, I have some personal questions of
no, there have to be
my
more.
own.
All that chat, there were only those questions?
It was pretty much summed up in all these questions only about West hating India and your thoughts on.
Anywhere in there in chat, I'm going to be watching. If there are any more chat questions, put them through. I really want to.
I am metaphorically the chat as well. I have questions.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, sir, firstly, I really liked your explanation of modernity. So what do you think of modernity? What is modernity? And what do you think of J.S.I. Deepak's critiques of modernity in India, that is Bharat?
I don't think J.S.I. Deepak so much a critic of modernity as he is a critic of Western liberalism. Is he particularly a critic of modernity? I don't remember that from the book.
It's how Western critics define modernity. That's what he has a problem with.
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, I read the book a couple years ago now. I mean, J.S.I. Deepak's India That Is Bharat is a really strange book because it is a lawyer does social science. And so he accurately and correctly reflects the narratives that he's reading from these post-colonial studies scholars who frankly are not very influential in the West. They're intellectually influential within a very small sliver of the world, but he uses it. It's kind of a reductio ad absurdum. That is, if you read his book, instead of saying what a brilliant book, what you should say is, oh, what a brilliant demonstration of how idiotic post-colonial scholarship is. Because his ultimate conclusion in the book, I mean, the fundamental thesis of the book is that the Hindus are the indigenous peoples of India. The current government of India is the heir to the British colonial government and thus is illegitimate. India is still not independent because it is being run by the oppressive colonial government, which is oppressing the indigenous people of India, the Hindus. And while that point of view, is popular in certain segments of the Indian population, and it's very popular on Op India and such, the idea that Narendra Modi is oppressing Hindus with his colonialist government is just idiotic, right? It's absolutely not true.
Okay.
Can you reach that conclusion if you take post-colonial scholarship seriously? Yes, but the lesson is not that. The lesson is that you can't take post-colonial scholarship seriously, even when it applies to Australia. I mean, the same scholars make out Australia to be the most genocidal country in the world, worse than Nazi Germany, because of the
yes, of
number,
course.
because of the
Yes.
number of civilizations it has created genocide against. And it's like, Australia is just not worse than Nazi Germany. I'm sorry. No matter, it's however you can reach that conclusion, it's just not true. Yeah, I hear you in the chat that he's talking about the bureaucracy, not Modi, but who's making policy, right? And who ultimately is appointing the bureaucracy and managing it? I mean, India is not being governed today for the last 15 years in such a way as to oppress Hindus. And while you can make particular cases about particular temples in South India, the idea that India is an oppressive government oppressing Hindus just lacks any face validity.
Sir, you underestimate how much post-colonial scholars are influential in India. In India, social science equals to post-colonial scholars.
Yeah, intellectually influential, but not influential in the world. I mean, to put it in perspective, no one is doing anything to bring Australia to the International Criminal Court for its genocides.
Yeah. Yes. They are just henchmen for anybody who wants to beat up Australia for one day or beat up India one day. That's the kind of stuff. Okay, we'll take this question. How different is Indian versus European democracy, which has College of Commissioners and a powerless parliament? Isn't it just technocracy, since Indian voter has more power than European voters?
In many ways, I think India has a more robust democracy. I think India is certainly more democratic than the European Union. If you were to think of the Indian nation as somehow parallel to the European Union and the Indian states as parallel to European countries, then yes, India is far more democratic than European Union institutions. Is India as democratic as European national institutions? I would say it depends on your vision of democracy. I mean, as you heard earlier, I'm opposed to things like, I'm opposed to autonomous institutions. And the one emblematic one is central banks. I fully accept that autonomous central banks are likely to produce more effective monetary policy than political central banks. That said, an autonomous central bank is clearly anti-democratic. It takes a major portion of policymaking out of the realm of democratic control and puts it in the realm of technocracy. Now, I think there's some need for that. Some things have to be put in a purely technocratic realm, but there's a very small number of things that need to be put in a technocratic realm just to ensure procedural fairness. Anything else can be done democratically. May not be done as well, but it's, I would rather see institutions be run democratically rather than being run technocratically. So is India more democratic? Well, yes, if you take my view of democracy. But on the other hand, many experts, reasonable experts, not just people I would criticize, feel that autonomous institutions promote good democracy. And that's a reasonable point of view as well. I'm reading these questions
should we
in the chat.
in India care about Western opinions beyond a point? We are fundamentally very different, and maybe we should let our actions and its results speak in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if. I mean, I didn't write my book for Indians. I was discovered in India. I was writing the book for Western audiences. I've been thrilled to be discovered in India. It's been a lot of fun. But my purpose in writing the book was not to tell Indians about their democracy. It was to tell Westerners about Indian democracy. Yeah, if Indians have I mean, most Americans couldn't care less what the world thinks of them. And certainly not Donald Trump. And I think India having that self-respect would probably be a good thing for India, just not to care. It'd put me out of business, though.
Okay. Yeah. Do you think democracies work differently depending upon the sizes of the countries? Is it fair to compare India with microstates in Europe? And if it isn't, what should we compare to?
there's no correlation between country size and any measure of democracy, no matter whose measure you prefer. It just isn't there. The big correlation is between GDP per capita or income level and quality of democracy. There's an exceptionally strong correlation. So it may not be fair somehow to compare it, but I think everything except a microstate. Microstates are a bit odd because they're more like cities than countries. So I already mentioned Chicago in the US is an entirely Democratic Party city. Well, Singapore is criticized for its low quality democracy because the PAP runs everything. But, is that just because, any one city in the US is like that? Is Singapore more a city or more a country? It's hard to say. But any country that has multiple power centers, whether it's Belgium or India, I think is roughly comparable.
What's your opinion on the Jan Swaraj Party and its attempt to introduce few libertarian policies?
I just don't know about it.
Neither do I, of their libertarian policies. What's the professor's personal opinion on Aristotle's criticism of the stupidity of democracy?
I saw that too. Aristotle is not a fan of democracy. And in fact, in my writing about democracy more broadly, I quote Aristotle as being very much not a fan of democracy. He actually considers democracy a pathological form of government. He would prefer the EU form of things, which is what he called a polity, the idea that institutions would run a country, not the people. Now, I'm not sympathetic to that, but I understand the argument. But Aristotle was certainly no Democrat.
So, as India gets richer, is it necessary to be more technocratic to sustain growth?
No. I think so. This was originally what the book was going to be about. It was going to be about development in India, not so much about democracy. Was going to be a chapter of the book. It wasn't going to be the whole book. So I've done a lot of work on India's economy that I haven't yet published. India is growing rapidly because it's an after effect of repression. India was under, Muslim colonialism, British colonialism, Nehruvian state planning. And it didn't start, the lid wasn't let off the Indian economy until 1991, right? So India only really started growing in a modern sense in 1991. It has a lot of catch up to do. That catch up will occur as long as state ownership and the license Raj is not reintroduced, which I don't think there's any appetite to reintroduce it. If reform were faster, if the opening up were faster, India would grow faster, but 7% is fine, right? So it'll take India a little longer to get to middle income status than it took China, but it'll be there by the 2030s. And I think by 2045 will overtake China in GDP per capita. At that point, then India has to have good policies. To get up to world average levels just means not having bad policies. Once a country starts exceeding the world average, it has to have good economic management. That's when you have to worry about technocracy, but that's a long way into the future.
You have previously stated that globalization receding is a misconception. How can India industrialize or move people out of farming? How do you rate recent moves like reforming labor laws, etc.?
So globalization is not receded. Globalization is stalled. That is, the world has globalized. It went for the world, instead of thinking of it as a continuous process, think of it as a step change. The world went from being not very global to being fully global. And the process of getting from here to there took from 1970 to 2010. It took 40 years. The world has been fully globalized since 2010 or so. You can make anything anywhere in the world, wherever it's cheapest to make it. There are very few barriers to doing so. India has participated in that. India's exports as a percent of GDP are actually higher than China's. They're not low by any means. India is a full participant in globalization. It's just India tends to participate in less visible goods. So the two biggest exports are refined petroleum and jewelry. So these aren't things that we think of as branding. It's not like buying a car or a phone where you see made in India on it. When you buy a diamond ring, it you don't see the made in India on your ring. When you put gas in your car, you don't see made in India on the gas. So it's not very visible, but India is fully participating in globalization. There was a third question there. Oh, the farmers. Yeah. So liberalization, I mentioned earlier that India has to liberalize if it wants to continue growing. That's why what first got me deeply involved in writing about Indian politics instead of economy was my article on the farm laws, where I was supportive of the farm laws. It was called India's Rich Farmers Block Pro-Poor Reform. Just gone from there. India cannot develop to middle income status unless a couple 100 million people move off farms into cities. Now, you could do that the China way, kick them off the farm against their will, or you could allow them in a liberal way to sell their farms to the highest bidder. But by prohibiting people from selling their farms, and the farm laws wouldn't even allow that. They just would have allowed people to sell their product into the market. Ultimately, India has to allow farmers to sell their farm. Right now, it's the children who are going off to cities, but the farmers are still there. These farms have to be consolidated, and people have to move off the land. That may be politically difficult. It may be unpopular in the short term, but it's going to be to everybody's benefit, especially to the benefit of the farmers, rather than being trapped on the land. They need to have a mechanism where they can cash out. And until India develops that mechanism, it's going to be a drag on growth.
Do you think universal basic income is possible in India, given 40% of the population is engaging in agriculture and there is no shortage of food?
Yeah, India already has universal basic income. It's called the grain handout. I don't know what the name is in India, but everyone has a right to free food in India. Universal basic income it's very popular as an intellectual exercise. In practice, for one reason or another, every country in the world has chosen instead to have targeted policies that address particular needs rather than just giving a universal basic income. If a universal basic income is not sufficient to live on, then it's not really a universal basic income. It's just a subsidy, like India's food handouts. If it is sufficient to live on, I think it would become a pathological policy. But no country has been willing to spend that much money on a universal basic income.
Okay, now there are countless questions coming, but we are about to reach the 3 hour mark. I will end the live stream now with my last question, sir.
That's because you took too long.
Do you want to take
get
any question from here?
If you'll stay, I'll stay. You want to do the questions? Let's do the questions. You have time?
Actually, I don't. I got more questions.
I kept telling you I'm doing a live stream.
Okay, let's take these 3.
All right.
Yeah, let's take these 3. How important is it for Indian democratic performance is put forward in Western world for people to people and economic relations between India and other democratic countries? What are we losing?
It's important for perceptions, but I don't think it's important for its actual democracy. And even people-to-people ties, if it's only elites, which is what it's likely to be, I don't think it would change much. Let's rapid fire, as many as you can.
If you rated countries on the basis of how reliable and solid their institutions are, where would you rate India out of 10? Where would Europe fall and USA and China fall in comparison?
Yeah, India is, I think, broadly at the level of a Eastern European Union member state, a Poland, a Czech Republic. It's not as well institutionalized as the UK and US, which just are extremely well consolidated institutional democracies, but it's very high up there. Better than Latin America, better than the rest of the developing world.
Right. Okay, so we just did. Okay. You correlated geography and economic progress in your previous talks. Can you please shed some light on that?
Economic growth was invented in Northwestern Europe. It spread from there. Now, that's a whole nother lecture, a whole nother debate, but it spread from there into places adjacent to that. In Asia, it spread from the US West Coast. It's no coincidence to Japan, Taiwan, Korea. So in Asia, the closer you get to the United States, the richer you are. right? And the farther you get away from the United States, the poorer a country is. And that's a pretty, I mean, that would be a better predictor of development than just about any variable you could choose about a country, because these networks creep across. That had long led me to be pessimistic about India's prospects, because India is not in those networks. And then I realized, after really doing a lot of work on it, a lot of thinking about it, that although those networks help create the conditions for a country to grow, they're not the reason the country grows, and that India has many of those conditions itself indigenously. And that's why I'd like to write in the future about the Indian economy, because it has developed those conditions without getting them from being adjacent to somebody else who had those conditions. But I haven't done the work on that.
Is that why? Is geography why Africa has been forever poor and will probably perpetually be poor?
So again, in Europe, there's a gradient from Northern Europe to Southern Europe to Northern Africa, and until you get to literally South Africa, which we know is rich because of colonialism, it's the Dutch who made South Africa rich, not the local tribes. Again, there's that gradient of getting farther away, and that's because modern growth started in the one place and spread from there. But like I said, a whole different lecture, and I also need more work to do it to talk about it with regard to India. But I've done some work on structural determinants of growth in the past.
Okay. Opposition weakness / stagnation being one of the most glaring weaknesses of India's democracy, but I see very few India watchers prominently highlight this. How can opposition be forced to modernize?
Yeah, the problem is that the opposition has successfully captured the Western narrative, convincing the Western world that they're repressed. The fact is that the opposition does a good running in India. I mean, the BJP does not run away with elections. Every election is close, and the BJP ekes out victories. Without that institutional advantage of its modern basis, it wouldn't eke out those victories. I don't think it's the ideology that gives BJP victories. I think it's that extra little plus it gets from superior organization and superior decision making. What needs to be done is for India's opposition parties to up their game, and it mystifies me how the Nehru-Gandhi family retains the respect of Western intellectuals. They retain respect in India is fine. People vote for them. I mean, it's a party, but that they retain the respect of Western intellectuals is just incredible to me, when it is transparently a family party that we would never accept in our own countries.
In a world divided on the US versus China-Russia axis, India is an economy that engages both. Do you think this is a long-term strength or a long-term risk? India will face pressures to choose.
I don't think it's either, because most growth comes from domestic productivity. These trade issues they catch a lot of the news. They're very important for particular people, but the real issue for growth is domestic productivity. And if India can raise its productivity, it'll grow rapidly. The rest is just on the edges. It's just not a big issue. It's an issue, but it's just not a big issue.
Okay, sir. Last question for today.
All right.
Sir, your father sold cigarettes in front of the Broadway, and you became a professor.
You've watched too many of my...
have a degree in applied maths as well.
Yeah,
I binged Salvatore Babones. Now, how much of that was because of government handouts and versus personal responsibility, etc.? When can that scenario be replicated in India without massive amounts of freebies and reservation?
Look, my story is a much less inspiring version of the Ambedkar story. Although I've accomplished a lot in life, I've not accomplished up to my level of talent, because I came from a relatively disadvantaged background with very little intellectual or social capital. Nobody knew how universities work. I didn't have parental support. That said, the government policy makes universities accessible both in the US and in India. If you're talented, you can get, if you're talented but come from a lower middle class background, maybe not from the very poorest of poor, but I didn't come from the very poorest of poor. It's not like I was born on a Native American reservation in remote Utah or something. But I had a challenging time making it through the US system, but I made it. And in the same way people can make it in India. I've met and heard of enough, take Narendra Modi himself. I mean, Narendra Modi, okay, he didn't go to JNU, but he got a correspondence degree from a reputable correspondence university and was able to succeed, right? And I think that India already has those opportunities for talented, hardworking people that they can succeed. It's not ideal. Is it much more ideal than other countries of India's level of development? Yeah, I suspect India does exceptionally well compared to other countries of $2,500 a year GDP per capita. And that's really the metric on which it should be judged.
Yeah. Okay, sir. I just remembered a question I had been meaning to ask you for about 1 or 2 weeks now. Since all your research seems to be a great defense of India, and I think that mostly happens because you compare India to other real existing countries and not to an imaginary utopia. So, if we compare the exclusion of Muslims in India to their exclusion in other countries as well, how does India fare? Because they seem to be excluded everywhere else as well, right?
So let's call it an appreciation of India.
Wouldn't that tell you that it's completely their fault then?
Yeah, let's call it an appreciation of India, not a defense of India. Through study, I've come to appreciate how successful India has been. The challenge of Muslim integration in Western countries is of a different kind because Muslim Indians come from a society that's ultimately the same society and of a similar level of income and a similar level of resources as their Hindu and Sikh neighbors. Muslims in Western Europe come from much poorer countries into much richer countries, different cultures, different languages. They're not really comparable cases. Muslim Indians have very similar economic statistics to Hindu Indians. Look, the book goes through this systematically. There's very little evidence. There's some small evidence, but very little evidence of Muslim disadvantage in India. The issues are social, not economic. There's no widespread Muslim poverty in India that's any worse than widespread Hindu poverty in India. There is a lack of highly educated Muslims in India, and that's entirely accounted for by the fact that the people who would become highly educated in the Muslim community inordinately go into the religious route instead of the secular route. That is, people are more likely to become an Islamic scholar as opposed to becoming an engineer.
Right.
And they had the capacity to do either. Right. They're choosing to become an Islamic scholar. But there are lower levels of university attainment. That's the only statistic on which Muslim Indians perform worse. Right. So this is something that I think India, that the West doesn't know about India. It's something that should be better known. The problem is, the problem is really one of ultimate integration into the Indian nation. It's not a challenge of poverty. Right. It's not a challenge of oppression. Muslim Indians tell us they experience very low levels of official discrimination. These issues just aren't there. The concern I raised, and the reason I devoted an entire chapter of the book to this, is that as I was writing the book, it increasingly became obvious to me that Indians were going to read the book, not only Westerners. And it's the message for Indians that this is a challenge that they have to address if they want to live up to their country's full potential for the future.
Right. Fair enough. So thanks a lot, sir. This was a huge interview. This was a mammoth discussion. Hope to have you back soon again for the remaining of the questions someday soon.
Next time you have to take questions after 10 minutes.
Next time it will be completely audience questions. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, guys.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না চায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো।